There we go. Welcome to Heterodox Vigor. In this case, this is my first guest video on my own channel. I've done plenty of multiple person videos on my couple of my buddies' channels. With that said, the reason why I wanted to bring Brian on is twofold. A, he and I have interesting conversations about economics, and so he's just a good person to talk about economics with, especially because, as far as I'm concerned, he is, I'm very heterodox. I think that he is very looking at, hey, what works? What do I see? What do I take on observation, not on faith? And I appreciate that about Brian. So, as far as where we want to get started, we're really going to be talking about the intersection of economics and the government, both how the government has to be involved and how maybe it has more cost than benefit to have them involved in a lot of situations. So to get started there, the big framing here that I think for our audience is this: we've got our Federal Reserve, we've got all these member banks. If you're not a member bank, you're going to be legally crippled from banking in the US. So you basically are playing ball on the Federal Reserve's terms. There's been a lot of shenanigans there. There's been a lot of theoreticals about, well, it's supposed to work like this, and then they find a loophole, and they have, oh, hey, it works this way, and then in the back you find them making, shifting 5 other things to make it work the way that they say it's supposed to work. So, with that framing, is there a specific government intervention that you'd like to start talking about?
I think a good place to start would maybe be Weimar, Germany.
There you go. And so in Weimar, Germany, there was a lot of setup. There was a lot of attitude going around that probably didn't incline people to try to just make the best of it because there was no other option. There was a lot of finger pointing about whose fault it was that there weren't better options on how to go, deal with that. The traditional narrative there is going to be straight up. They promised too much stuff to too many people, and they printed too much money, and it was mostly because of the socialists. Is essentially that narrative? Is that basically where you would go with that?
I'd agree with that absolutely. I think there is an untold aspect of Weimar, which is interesting, especially given our conversation, and that is the maybe somewhat, given we're talking about heterodox stuff here on this channel, maybe a somewhat heterodox historical view that the inflation was very much purposeful. Maybe even
sure.
runaway inflation was very much
sure
purposeful.
that they were trying to kill the Deutschmark.
Yeah, because they in owing X amount of dollars, if you inflate your currency 20%, you owe 20% less real dollars.
So the issue that I have with that, just from the German side, was that they didn't owe Deutschmarks; they owed dollars. So really, there was an incentive, in a way, on the people who were owed the money in various forms to try to destroy the Deutschmark and to keep, by extension, keep prices and wages in Deutschmarks lower within Germany so that people would have to provide more goods and services for that same dollar of debt that they're paying off.
That's very interesting. To be honest, I haven't heard that view before. It makes sense. I think you could probably also say that if that were the case and the dollar and the debt were denominated in dollars, I don't have the terms of the agreement, but if that were the case, then
Keynes was very much not in favor. He had plenty to say. I'm not sure if you've looked at that.
Keynes, I believe, Keynes didn't even really see the hyperinflation coming, didn't he?
No. So what
He
I
was
mean,
offside
no,
on
what I
it.
mean is Keynes, when he saw the terms at the end of World War I, predicted that the terms were punitary, unworkable, and that it would lead to more conflict in the future, is
And
what I mean.
very interestingly, Keynes kind of wrote the history about that period because he's such an overshadowing figure.
Yeah.
And he glosses over a lot of his own fuck ups in the analysis that he made in that period, I think.
I agree, but I'm much more
as well.
Sorry. I was going to say I'm much more critical about what he said about FDR and what was going on there than what he had to say about the agreement with World War One, though. And that's the thing is, if it was looking back and he's like, oh, well, what I meant was, that would be a different story, like trying to cover his tracks or something. In this case, he actually was saying, no, we need the kind of peace at the end of World War One that people can be friends over. And the Germans aren't going to be our friends if we treat them this way. And that was Keynes's point. And that's just why I'm saying that there was so much bitter blood in Germany that people whose job it was to say it's their fault. Now do what I want because it's their fault. Those people, coming out of the woodwork like crazy because there actually was a situation where hostile foreign powers were making life harder for those people because they were essentially taxing a high percentage of their labor, in the same way that someone in New York right now might be upset that government is taxing their labor at a high rate in order to give the hookup to these immigrants that they're moving in.
Yeah, that's a great point. And people they talk about when immigration comes in and they say, oh, well, it's not a big deal. It's not like these immigrants are taking money and services that would have otherwise gone to, say, like homeless New Yorkers or poor New Yorkers or something like that. But it absolutely does put strain on shared infrastructure. I mean, I was just driving in New York. You can't drive down the fucking road. You can't get anywhere. So that's a function of people being on that road, making it undrivable. Too many of them. You add more people to that equation, you fuck that road up further. And that puts a negative, that puts an inefficiency on the entire economy there. So it's just so silly that people think that it has no influence whatsoever.
Well, but again, that's because it's not that they came up with the idea on their own that it has no influence. They have had people whose job it is in one way or another. And again, by that, I don't necessarily mean like, hey, you're the guy that gets paid to lie to the peasants. No. I mean, the good old saying that if a man's salary depends upon him not understanding something, he won't understand it. On that level, that there are people who are utterly incurious of the people that criticize aspects of their profession, of the way that they run their corporation, whatever. Absolutely uncurious, because if they took a look at it and if they found that maybe a change was warranted, it would be a very inconvenient change for them, a costly change for them to make, costly to them personally with how they've organized their life. That's my take there.
Definitely.
So back to Weimar Germany, the idea there, unfortunately, there was, not just from the populist right, but also, of course, from the populist left, there were a lot of voices out there saying, hey, look, the rich people and the people that make their money off of the banking system and the people that make their money off of their university degrees, these people have these people are basically leaving the burden of dealing with this on the foreigners, from the foreigners. They're leaving it on us, and now they're giving us platitudes about why it has to be that way because of their fancy reasons that as the little people we care.
Well.
We don't care what your special books say. We don't care that you have the little degree. We want, when we go and work a full week, when we get home, we want to be able to go buy the things that our family needs and pay our rent. As workers, that's what we're about, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, that kind of softness in Germany was created by these policies that just did not look to the needs of the common worker. And by the time that you get to the socialist corner, sometimes it's hard to tell. Is this a reformist? Is this someone that just wants to change the government to help the workers more? Or are they actually associated with some revolutionary totalitarian project that wants to, grab the steering wheel of society away from whoever has it right now and do their utopian project? And we all know that even the ones that work out better, I'm just going to call that out. I've said so many times, fascism is the version of socialism that works. And the socialists like, that's terrible. No, fascism is exclusionary. Socialism is inclusive and universalist and blah, blah, blah. Well, no. Number one, socialists had no problem persecuting and liquidating the people that weren't on board with, oh, yes, sir, whatever you say, sir. And it really that bad, right? Mm-hmm. But number two, so the fascists took it a step further. They just got rid of the people that weren't going to be worthwhile anything to them, even if they were 100% compliant, right? Because so it's just, it really is the same idea. It's breaking society until socialism works. That's what fascism is, from my perspective.
There's a, I believe, to kind of come back on the fascism point, there is a book, I believe, by Gunther Reimann by the name of Vampire Economy, which I've heard referenced about the wartime Nazi economy. Well, obviously, the biggest threat to the economy was air raids and their cities being liquefied, probably. But I think there's a very compelling case to be made that a lot of the largesse and a lot of the success, the material and economic success that's attributed to the Germans of that time, really came about from reappropriating things, not from productivity and not from like a massive uptake in output, but in the ability to reappropriate goods that are worth quite a bit.
One of my favorite statistics about World War II is that when you look at the notional total cost of the war and you look at the total notional cost of the wealth that was seized from Jews in Germany, guess how much of the war costs the wealth covered, approximately?
I have no idea.
A third. So a group of people who represented less than 2% of the population in Germany, when their wealth was appropriated by the regime that decided to disregard their rights for what they saw as historical reasons, right? Mm-hmm. When that happened, the shift was, another way of saying this from the perspective of the people who are intolerant of non-Germans is that people of foreign descent had managed to accumulate a third of the wealth in their country. And I mean, and when you look at it by land owned, it's actually really similar, of land that was owned not by the government before they started just straight up disregarding people's rights and taking their stuff. Then that 2% or so really did hold about a third of the land that was ownable in a private. So the thing is, it was a class war that ended up basically split by ethnicity because of the disparate location of those ethnicities in the class groups for historical reasons, right? And because of all of the ugliness that they had with the foreigner, because that's the thing, like, it's not that for the most part, there were Jews involved, but Jews were not sitting around writing the surrender documents for World War One for Germany. That's not what was happening. This was English people. This was French people. These are the people that were the majority representations for the main powers involved in getting that surrender from Germany.
The blame is laid at the feet generally of the French, but I view that as probably an Anglo mischaracterization. I think
I'm
the
I'm sure it's an insider thing in the same way that I don't blame the British for Zelensky feeling like he couldn't negotiate with Putin. I blame Boris Johnson. You know what I mean? So I
yeah,
definitely think that there's individual blame that needs to be laid about the surrender situation for Germany,
I think
and that wasn't a collective decision, you know?
from a Ray Dalio kind of point of view, like a Clash of Civilizations point of
Yeah,
view, the big thing happening in Europe was much like China is now threatening us in our sphere of influence in the Pacific. And we're starting to get antsy about that and feeling like, are we going to have to crush the balls of China? Are we going to have to remind China that, these free trade corridors are really America trade corridors and that they need to relax. I
except
think
it
that
only works
same
because we pretended it was the other way, right?
yeah, but generally, I think that same as an American, you can
Mhm.
understand that feeling of
I
what
do,
China
but
sends
that's what I'm
warships.
saying. I hate the deception though. That's where I'm at. Like I look at so many of the covert actions that we took in South America against the Marxists, and I'm like,
Mm.
sorry, not sorry, but I am a little bit sorry that we felt like we had to lie about it for so long. And that's one of the things is that I really see it as a type of pollution because once you just start degrading the ability for countries to trust each other operationally, for countries to trust that, hey, that leader over there, he understands that it's in his interest to not mess me over, and
Hmm.
he understands that I understand it's in my interest not to mess him and his people over. We've
Hmm.
lost that, and it's disgusting. Like, blame the Clintons and the Bushes. And that's the thing, is that to some extent, um, it
I think it's
goes
a
back
totally
further
natural
because
feeling.
people were lying about what we were doing to try to save the world.
I think it's a totally natural feeling. I mean, if you run an area and
Hmm.
somebody comes into your area and then starts to get to a point where they're challenging you and they have influence over as many people as you do, and you ran that area successfully, you start looking at, I mean, naturally, I think just as a human
Well, yeah,
natural thing,
even
it's
as a
just like, how do I know
right-minded
about this
person,
person?
as a right-minded person, if you're doing what you think is the right thing, you're doing it successfully, and
Hmm.
someone else wants to give it a try, you're going to be like, hold up, are you sure that you can also be successful? I don't need people getting hurt, right?
Hmm. Well, yeah, I think, and I'm explaining it in terms that look like it's just, like the what is it? The Who are the guys who came before the Greek gods, the Titans?
Yeah.
It's like Kronos eating the babies. It seems totally barbaric and messed up. But what I'm saying is that in the mindset, because humans are so fallible and so
Sure.
emotional, in the mindset of a nationalist, when you see an upstart power intruding in your area, you don't view it as an eating of the young. You view it as a maintaining of the natural order. You view it as, oh, we're just protecting the world order. So when you say, hey, it's like this is a perversion, this is like a lie. I think this is the lie that really originates within humans and the human spirit, about the lie that they feel that comes up within themselves. That is their emotion. So it is in a sense true in that it's an aspect of human jealousy and just kind of the twisted way in which the human mind works. So that's my view on England. My view on England is that Germany was like the ascendant power, and they were just, just a natural inclination. They their aggression manifests towards Germany the same way that our aggression is now manifesting towards China.
Well, and I almost want to problematize that, because I'm going to say it was actually a lot more like we're getting into it with Russia right now. Because the fact of the matter is, the Soviet Union was always the bigger threat compared to Germany as far as Britain, England was concerned. It's I understand that there's been a lot of people that think it's an unacceptable viewpoint, so they don't actually make strong arguments in their favor. So I actually have a tough time steel manning the mainstream narrative on this one, because the fact of the matter is, when you look at what Hitler planned on doing, like it man, there's so many things. Like, well, let's start here. A little bit before that, do you remember the Zimmerman letter? It basically, allegedly, there was this telegraph message that was intercepted. No, I mean, I think stuff like that, when we know historically, like, for instance, how FDR behaved regarding transparency and honesty with the American people about wartime happenings. I'm skeptical of that. I don't know, but
FDR was
like,
a tyrant.
No, that looked like a psyop, like the Lusitania or whatever. Or
he again, I'm the Supreme Court. He had absolutely no desire.
He didn't have standards.
The constitutional system.
No. But the point is, but because of that lack of reliability of the information coming from that direction, right? What we see is, again, we should have been opposed to Stalin, and we should, and that's the thing, is that the fact that we labeled for reasons, that FDR had in mind, and that's, one of the people that I'm like, man, I have respect for him, but almost like he's the other side. Churchill, like, that guy was very good at what he did. And yeah, it's great that such a strong and wise leader existed and all that. But when you start looking at what his actual values were, and what he cared about, and what he was willing to sacrifice for what he cared about, like, I mean, I'm not in the camp defending that. I think that, and again, in the same way, it's like, I don't blame England and US. I blame Churchill and FDR for just not perceiving that it wasn't okay to let the Soviets keep Eastern Europe, and that it would have been worth continuing to fight, especially because we literally had atomic weapons. And the fact that that we didn't, and the fact that when you look at what happened after the war regarding both, but when you look at it, it's crazy, because what it actually looks like after the war is, it looks like Marxist academics joined and took over our university system to the extent that they did, and that it was actually the German intelligence operatives, aka Nazis, that we brought on board to help create our own intelligence services. And unfortunately, we're kind of dealing with the legacy of that today, in the sense that, while there have been literally millions of patriotic Americans who've served in our intelligence services and done the right things, and honestly are Constitution first type people, we've always had a kind of an insiders club of sort within, especially on the CIA side in particular. But NSA, FBI, all of those are connected enough that they really have an influence on each other. And when you look at the history of, like, when Whitney Webb has done some great work on this, but basically where we used our intelligence services got involved with organized crime in the U.S. during the World Wars, and there were partnerships that were formed. So by the time, so by the time that you're getting to like World War II, you actually have the Italian mafia and the Jewish mafia and the FBI have cross-pollinated both in people and tactics. And you can see a ramping up of those tactics over time. For instance, like what did mob bosses used to do if they wanted someone in their pocket? Well, if it was a nice upstanding guy, what do you suppose? How are you going to get a nice upstanding guy in your pocket? The guy who cares about his reputation in the community.
Get him to do something incriminating.
You're going to get, well, it doesn't even have to be a pure crime. It can just even be embarrassing. Incriminating is great, but embarrassing is really what counts, because what you want isn't for the law to clamp down on them. That's almost a hassle, right? No, what you want is for, if they exposed, they would just want to kill themselves if they were exposed for doing this thing, right?
An injury to pride.
Yeah. So normally, well, it's not just an injury of pride. It's more like destruction of identity. Because if you are Mr. Leader that everybody looks up to and can trust, and then, oh no, they just found out that you got seduced by someone that wasn't your wife, and look, they even took pictures. Here's proof. Da 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 da. Oh. Well, I guess I better play ball with these guys if I don't want everybody to know, right?
Right.
And that's where it started. And over time, you can see as they moved into the 50s and 60s, more and more, they would specifically target homosexual men when it wasn't as socially acceptable, right? They would purposely get some dude to seduce the dude they were trying to get dibs on. And then they'd be like, "Oh, we own you now. As long as you play ball our way, we'll make sure you have a great time, and we'll record it every time."
And that evolves.
We'll take pictures every time, and you're gonna have fun, because the moment that you stop playing ball, then you're exposed.
And that evolves towards Epstein with Mossad.
Correct.
Right.
That absolutely evolves towards, oh, well, homosexuality is acceptable these days. What isn't acceptable?
Pedophilia.
Yeah, and where most of us would draw a line and say, "Hey, that's a tool I'm not willing to use." Right? Like even the Chris Hansen entrapment people, which I'm not a big fan of for reasons, but even they were not sending 12-year-olds into dangerous, bad people's houses. They were sending a freaking 19-year-old who looked like she was 16, right? So at some point or another, you're like, wait a second, why wouldn't there have been a standard? Like, where did we go from defending and upholding the Constitution to mafia tactics?
Well, we probably weren't the only game in town there. The Russians were probably running very similar operations. And I imagine, the Chinese and their authoritarian tactics are running very unscrupulous operations. And every power center finds a border with another power center that's doing something along those lines. Maybe MS-13 in South America, et cetera, et cetera.
They're even worse.
Power is another power. So
and that's the thing. Let's be clear. I'm not a big fan of the CCP. I'm not. MS-13 is just worse. Like I mean, but that's the thing, is nobody in their right mind is proposing that we let MS-13 run Harvard, right? I mean, that's where we're at, is that we've got these people who are unapologetic.
Maybe it's worth a shot.
They're unapologetic about the idea of using totalitarianism to impose socialism with social justice values, or whatever their latest, which that cracks me up, because when you look at actually existing socialists, they are often just as, and you can say, oh, it was a product of the times. Back then, the lefties didn't realize that it was okay if they were from like regressive Catholic countries, whatever the excuse is. And it's like, Okay, but like if you look at the way that like Che Guevara treated men who wanted to be physically involved with other men, it wasn't tolerance,
No,
right? No.
no, not at all.
So that's my thing, is all these people that are like, that's the joke of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be like the after the revolution, I'm totally gonna be, and it's like,
Right.
are you now? Are you now?
Yeah.
And to the extent that you don't, here's the thing: go look up what the jobs were in the Soviet Union, and I mean, think about what the modern equivalents are. You're probably going to get one of those. Like,
Mhm.
oh, you unless you literally are part of the inner party, in which case you should watch your back, because that things happen to the backs of the people in the inner party. That's how
Yeah.
that works. If
Yeah.
you're not part of that inner party, then no, you will be in the salt mines, right?
Yeah,
So,
people talk about inner parties sometimes like it's a cakewalk. Maybe if you're the daughter of a very powerful man who is killing people, you have a cakewalk. But I think within party politics, you are they're playing their own game, and the gloves do come off in that game.
yes. Well, and that's the other thing that people need to understand about, it's a big club and you're not in it.
Mhm.
Yeah, guess what they do in that club? They compete to cooperate, right? So they compete
Mhm.
at how they can advance the big project and take credit for it, which of course they're going to frame that in terms of, look at this that I brought to the big project, but the purpose is to take credit for it. And if they can take credit for something that was actually someone else, all the better.
Yeah, that's something I
So,
was thinking about with Joe Biden, with
mhm,
his huge spending bill that he pushed.
mhm.
Like every Republican wants to be the next Reagan, right? Joe Biden wanted to be the next FDR
Mm-hmm.
because he's a Democrat. And
Yeah.
so he pushes this massive spending bill at a time when it seemed like the global elite, especially the financial circles, was talking about reeling in spending and about
Mm-hmm.
tightening conditions. He was loosening them and flooding the zone with money. So it's like that seems to be a conflict within the elite. But Joe Biden gets to rise in prominence with a big spending bill. He gets to pretend to be FDR,
Mm-hmm.
and the bankers have their own idea of what their prominence is and how they have Paul Volcker, or they have their own heroes who are the kind of guys who castrate the FDRs of the world and don't let
You
them
know,
spend
and that's the funny part though, is that if it was only that simple, because unfortunately, like you're pointing out, there are consequences to these types of behavior.
it. Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, you could easily say, like, what was the consequences of us trying to use monetary stimulus to monetize the deficit during the years after the 2008 crash? um, because there was reduced revenues. In fact, a lot of companies, when they straight up lose money for the year, they're not paying taxes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the answer to that? Well, the answer is to tell the banks, hey, please buy these treasury bills at auction. The Federal Reserve is going to buy them from you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your cooperation. And so that's what happened, is that every time that we would fund the government to the level that the people in the government decided was what they were going to vote for for whatever their reasons for voting for it. And then, like, oh, there's this much, by the rules that we play by, we have to print this many certificates of debt that
Mm-hmm.
we will trade $4 in order to fund the government, because that's the system, right? And
Yeah.
and and the way, and of course, just for in case anyone out there is not familiar with how they actually do that, what they do is that they auction the debt at below its face value. So to figure out what kind of yield you're getting out of it, you're basically going to have to figure what price did you have to pay to get it, and
Mm-hmm.
then minus that from its face value. That is your profit, over divide up however long it's going to take to mature. um for for the reason that we've never had a pure and admitted U.S. debt default, then there's a zero risk premium on the national debt, because most of the debt that's being purchased is actually being purchased initially by banks that are then and that's the other funny part, is that there's been a number of rule flip-flops by the Fed over the years about like how many treasury bills they need to hold as reserves and all that, whether it counts at different years. There's been revisions, but basically what it's gotten to is that, again, they've just taken the safeties off of the system. So for instance, again, like theoretically, why do we have national debt in the first place? Why didn't we just print it? Well, what happened in Weimar Germany when they just printed it, and why, and at what rate, and what was their response? Because that matters, right? So before we review back into the US, let's dive into what happened in Germany, roughly speaking, which was that it was not politically feasible for them to run the kind of deficits to do the payments in dollars that they would have wanted. So yeah, essentially what they were doing was they were printing Deutschmarks and trading them directly for dollars to pay it. And the more that they did that specifically, the more... Okay, but it gets worse though, because again, like, how are you usually going to get dollars? Well, you're going to sell stuff to people in the United States, and that was really hard to do. And the thing is, if you can, and it wasn't hard to do on accident. It would have been to the advantage of the people in Germany to be able to sell their goods to the people in the U.S., and it would have been to the detriment of competing sellers in the U.S. who would have had to deal with a flood of low-priced foreign goods.
Yeah.
It was our fault that it was low-priced on some level, but that's what we were dealing with. So basically, we made a mess in Germany, and I say we, the West, collectively, however you want to say that. We made a mess in Germany after World War I, and we didn't want to be involved in cleaning it up, and because we weren't willing to try to keep peaceful conditions in Germany, then we ended up dealing with a Germany that wasn't peaceful yet again.
Yeah, definitely. And I think cutting off large German population areas and ceding them to other countries, I think, was probably a mistake. I think that should have been avoided, because there's you try to create a balance of power, and you try to do that by separating populations off. But if you're doing something that's clearly unjust,
and you get revanchism, though. That's it though. Revanchism, right? You have, oh no, they were once us, they can be us again. And it almost doesn't matter if the people there actually feel that way. They could be like, oh no, I'm happily a citizen of Denmark. And it's like, oh, but you're German descended, so you're ours. That's how they work.
I think to go back to an earlier point you were talking about in terms of the debt and the auctioning that off to the banks.
Yeah.
What the American debt is one of the most sought after financial instruments in the entire world, including from our rivals, including unfortunately for them, the Russians, because a lot of that was frozen, and the Chinese. They will gobble up our debt generally. And that's because they're willing to disrespect their currency far worse than we are willing to disrespect ours. So having our
I was going to say also the petrodollar was a huge influence there, though. Like, I don't think it makes all... I mean, I'm just saying, we can hardly gloss over that. The reason why in 2018 people wanted US dollars was to buy petroleum from places like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, but you could ask yourself, I mean, I buy debt myself. I buy bonds myself because there's good yield. And when the yield is higher than inflation, It's a good way to and when the or when the Fed funds rate is very high, business development is going to be stunted as almost a matter of course. So because of that, the stock, there will be a recession. So you kind of want your cash to be sitting out when that recession goes in, and then you want to deploy it when it gets to its lowest point. So in a strategic sense, you want the American debt then, and that's all by design. That's how it's built. But as an investor, I want my money to be in a place where it will be appreciated by appreciating, right? That is where its use in that function will deliver more value than its use in, say, another function. So that's just
the baseline benefits, the floor of capitalism. This is why anyone does capitalism. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. If I put $1 into farming apples and people want apples way more than they want pumpkins, then I'm going to put that $1 into apples and I'm going to get more return because people
than if you made
appreciate
pumpkin.
those apples. And so that's investing. So as a debt investor, I don't, even if I were to get a better yield in Italy or England or China or any other place in their currency, in their denominated currency, even if I could, Australia, Japan, I wouldn't do it.
There's too much forex risk there, right? I mean, you don't know whether their currency is going to go up or down compared to what you want to buy.
Yeah, and as distrusting as I am of the American financial system, I trust them significantly less, which is to say almost zero trust at all. Everyone gets their level of trust. The America trust is not at 100, but it's significantly higher than the China, Italy trust.
Institutionally, here's my thing, which is that, and again, you might have a different thought process, but my thought process when I hear your situation is, even if I'm considering a foreign investment, at the end of the day, it's all coming back to dollars because I live in a place where we use dollars. And even if I say, well, that's cool, I'm not a dummy. If the exchange rate goes the wrong way, I can just leave it over there in investments until they get more favorable and then bring it back. Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's a great way to get your investment to zero when you hold on to something because it goes the wrong way. But countries don't usually go to zero, usually. So yeah, and that's the problem is that when there's risk, because when we're pricing what we think this stuff is going to be worth a few years out, we're always crossing our fingers, like you said, that that whoever is in charge of the currency that we're using isn't going to Weimar it, right?
Yeah,
that they aren't going to just monetize. Well, and that's where I come in and say, so my question is, if we took a hard look at the U.S. system, what is the deficit that we're monetizing? What amount of monetizing the deficit is actually sustainable under growth? And let's assume that we know we need to print a bunch more dollars for structural reasons.
Mm-hmm.
What options do we have in terms of using the government, whether it's through changing regulations or whether it's through the government actually owning and operating something? What options do we have for our government to fight inflation? And I feel like that's where people have been really uncreative, because they always want to look at the quantity of money side, which is shaky as hell, dude. The velocity changes and boom, your numbers are completely different, right?
Yeah, the supply side is totally different. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, and also, bro that loves weed and has a marginal dollar, he's going to spend it on weed. Bro that is heavily invested in the solar panel factory over in China, guess where his next dollar is going? So it really matters who gets the dollars. And when we're looking, and that's my concern when a lot of people just try to collapse the inflation discussion to a single number of this is how much it went up, when it's like, okay, but let's be real here. What actually happened was corn went up 12% and rents went up 7%, and it was a good year for wheat, so wheat actually went down 3%. You don't know until you actually take a look. And the problem is collecting all of that. Good luck. And so that's been the traditional critique of, say, the Austrian school, of these other schools, has been, you guys are playing with numbers that you made up. Like, you can say, I got them in the world. How did you get them in the world? You chose the numbers to go after, which means that what you're saying is only as precise as your data. And when your data is just like, you get 3 layers deep into imprecise data, and it's just a model. It's just a toy. It's not a prediction machine.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things to say there. I think the inflation of big booty bitches is getting out of control. It's really costs a lot to get a good big booty bitch going these days. And
you know what? Just make sure that you don't have any income under her social, and then she can get food stamps, and she can just go ahead and calorie max per dollar.
The booty will get bigger per dollar. That's a good idea. But yeah, I think, well, first of all, if the American system were not seriously competitive, someone would have eaten our lunch and fucked our girlfriend by now. I think there is a certain kind of golden rule of pragmatism, and that is the person who is on top in a highly competitive environment tends to be the person who has enough of the right things coalescing for them to be able to abuse that power, right? So that the power has to come from somewhere. Also,
well, to be fair, you say abuse, but I mean, I've seen a lot of situations where people have been critical of decisions of, for instance, Mr. Elon Musk. Again, plenty of things I think he screwed up on, but there's some times when people just want to dogpile him, and I'm like, I think that's not well thought out. I think that his move is fine when you look at it from his point of view. And after all, is he supposed to be deciding for what benefits him or what benefits you? The $8 verification thing or whatever, I don't even know if the price has changed. I never got around to signing up. It's not important to me right now. If it is one day, I will have no problem paying it. Like, oh no, $12 a month to have someone not give a blue check mark to another Benjamin Forney. Like, that's, if I was a famous Benjamin Forney, that's a no-brainer. Like, to me, I didn't even flinch at that business decision, because you can keep using Twitter otherwise. And same thing with the data scraping stuff, right? When they're like, people that aren't verified are going to be limited to 500 views per day on X.
That's
right?
a fair number.
500. That's a good number. I'm sorry, if you have enough spare time to look at 500 posts on Twitter, you can afford the $8, $12, whatever it is. And and to me, if you're like, yeah, but I don't want to be verified, I don't want them to be able to see that I'm scraping all this data, then I'm like, it sounds like you were trying to get a free lunch. And Elon Musk was like, don't feel like handing out free lunches. I'm not obligated to hand out free lunches. Have a free snack instead. So anyway.
Twitter was a shit pile before he took it over, but it was a shit pile that was towing the line. So nobody talked about
that. It was funded to promote a sanitized message, and that's all it was. So yeah, whenever it was taken over,
that they're being defunded now.
Yeah, well, and that's the funny part too, is that at what point is that actually going to crimp Elon Musk's style? Never.
It can't.
Never.
The beautiful
all he has to do is lower. Well, listen. All he has to do is lower the expenses to meet his revenue, and he's a capable human being of doing that, right?
Yes.
So if he's worried about losing money, he can just shrink, and it'll work. And
Mhm.
and people, and again, and people that don't understand that probably didn't understand what you pointed out, which was that it was a mess before he took it over,
Yeah,
and it was
it's
being run
horrible.
much worse, and it still worked.
I love investing in stocks. I love investing in tech and social media because it's something I enjoy. And
Yeah.
if you know something about something, you generally have a good idea of whether it's a good opportunity. So when
And
Facebook
whether
was
it's headed in a good direction. Yeah.
Yeah. So when Facebook was getting crushed in the markets because there were a bunch of fashionable people who had been kind of invited to think a certain way by Democrats in Congress, that that Zuckerberg is this evil man and we need to haul him into Congress because he isn't forcing people to be Democrats enough, and it was just like stupid. And then the stock
He
got cut.
only gave 400 million to Hillary Clinton. Come on, guys.
Yeah, like unless he lets the CIA just have a ban button, like he's some kind of
Well,
it was fucking
it
crazy.
came out. No, it came out. They don't have a button. They have an email. They have an email that just like, Twitter exposed it, but like they're like, yeah, this went on at Facebook too. There were people whose job was basically to handle the emails coming, like there was someone in the censorship department that, trust and safety council, whatever the hell, they actually had someone who responded to, hey, look, we have a special email address that we specifically gave to the people in the government, the establishment people, of course, that said, if you need an official takedown request because there's content that shouldn't be on this platform, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever, these places had connections, communication with people in, and it wasn't, and that's the thing, like people will say something, and I mean, I want to hear them out. I'm a big First Amendment enjoyer, however you want to say that. Like I want to make sure that everybody is getting their First Amendment rights. And if someone involved with administration from one party or the other wants to talk to their friend that works at a social media company and share their opinion on politics and plan politically what they're going to do, that's great. But the moment that you start using government resources or corporate resources to start engaging in these censorship behaviors, the question becomes, at what point is the government doing it? If they're coercing a company into doing it, and you say, oh, but the companies want to be coerced. Oh, really? Do the shareholders want to be coerced, or is it individuals inside the company that are selling access and influence, of company resources to outsiders? Oh, well, they're not exactly selling it because it's for a political cause. Okay, exactly. So it's an in-kind contribution to a political campaign, and we have laws about that. So when the in-kind contribution to a political campaign is to censor people on behalf of government officials,
Yeah,
no, that's a
that's
problem. That's a
that's
First
far
Amendment
more
violation.
of a campaign finance violation than paying off Stormy Daniels not to talk about the shape of
Yeah.
your penis.
Well, and that
Far
just
more.
goes back to, yeah, right. And that just goes back to the fact that campaign finance laws in general are going to be First Amendment violations if you look close enough at them. We have freedom of association, we have freedom of expression, and unless there is an outright quid pro quo that involves someone doing something illegal or involves someone, breach of fiduciary duty for private gain in some way. Unless you have that, well, no, sure, it's just people talking. But the moment that you start breaching fiduciary duty for private reasons, whether it's for the private sector or the public sector, you're into criminal behavior.
Yeah,
And that's
definitely.
And like I said, so that's my thing is, yeah, I could go on and on about campaign finance laws. I won't, but I'm just going to point that out that, in Citizens United, they're like, yeah, as long as you aren't literally handing the money to the politician, there's theoretically nothing that the government can do about it under the First Amendment. And as long as you put a wall of separation between the campaign and that's the thing, the wall of separation between the campaign and the super PACs or whatever, that's even kind of borderline unconstitutional, right? So I'm all kinds of sympathetic to, well, I think that you can't just use the government to micromanage these companies and what they're censoring.
Well, don't
really?
get me,
Really
don't
though?
get me
Isn't
wrong.
that what you guys are doing? Like, holy shit.
Constitutional proceduralism is sure it's a fine enough tool in many instances, and when it comes to free speech, especially when it comes to the Second Amendment situation in New Mexico, it was a fine thing to pursue. There's a lot of times to just go, hey, this is not constitutional, and to put the kibosh on it like that. That said, I'm really a big fan in terms of like defeating something politically, defeating something in terms of what's happening in the world. I'm a big fan of just power of will. And my feeling is that will can take many forms. It can take the form of money. It can take the form of art. It can take the form of speech, compelling speech. It can take an infinite number of forms. And really, when you're looking to bury your enemy, you're not trying to bury your enemy on procedure or money or any one dimension. You're trying to bury them on all dimensions. Right. So when I would fight back against, let's say, the ADL burying anyone they don't like and destroying them financially, I would say crush them with will. Don't crush them with money. Don't crush them with the procedure. And I'm not saying don't pursue these things. I'm saying every single facet, every single theater of war is something that the will can flow through, and crush them everywhere. So you have to understand this is an enemy organization. They are using their influence to attack you, and to attack people that you may appreciate, or free people.
Right.
And they need to be counterattacked. That's it.
And what that counterattack is going to be dependent upon how is it that they're making a problem? What's our option to neutralize their ability to make that problem?
And the left is great at that. Yeah. The left is good at saying this is an enemy. Wherever you are, whoever you are, find a way to hurt them. It doesn't need to be any particular way. It can be any way you want. Just hurt them.
One of the downsides of most educated people in the US being the product of a neo-Marxist university system is that even those right of center have basically been brainwashed into if not the literal the letter of the law, the spirit of the law of never punch left. Because all too often you see these centrists and they just aren't willing to call out the either the damage that the other side's policies are going to do, or they're not willing to call out the crooked motives that people have for getting these policies into place in the first place. But they're the first to start denouncing people for having the wrong opinions further right. That's not progressive enough. Excuse me, not progressive enough? Aren't you supposed to be a conservative? Oh, I forgot. Conservatives are centrist. Conservatives are conserving the things that the progressives were pushing 30 years ago.
Conservatives are progressives driving the speed limit.
Yeah, right. And that's exactly it, is that with all due respect, have you not noticed that they raise the speed limit every once in a while? That's where we're at is, and I mean, I say that as someone, I'm not a conservative, I'm actually a liberal. There's a couple of positions that I hold that drag me a lot further left than most right wingers, but all in all, I support a mixture of right wing and liberal, liberal, not progressive, liberal, like letting people exercise their own rights, except where it doesn't screw up other people exercising their rights. That's my baseline assumption. Yeah. And as a rightist, well, what does it have to do with me being a rightist? I understand that the world has certain ways that work better than others, and that to the extent that we have a responsibility to be good stewards of the resources that we have, that there are people depending on us doing our jobs correctly to where they're not going to suffer, it's incumbent upon us to try to identify the ways that work and to use ways that work as again to be good stewards of the resources that we have. And that doesn't matter whether it's your fiduciary duty that you're carrying out for an institution, or whether it's literally you're a single guy with no dependents. And the fact of the matter is, you still have agency. Your actions in the world are still going to affect people. You might only have yourself to worry about, but you have yourself to worry about in an environment that is filled with other people.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I'm not a member of the United Auto Workers Union, but I think that you could make a very compelling case that inflation has gone up a lot, and the profits of GM and Ford have kept pace, maybe even a little bit better than kept pace with it, but the wages of these people haven't. And
Right.
You hear a lot of stuff in finance media of like, crush them because you can, crush them because, you know, these companies can just go to Mexico,
Right.
they can just go to Vietnam, they can just go to wherever. I don't see. I think this country is number one hegemon in the world, not because it has a really good slave caste. In fact, I don't think that the slavery economy of the South was that good. I think a good, vibrant middle class, which did come about in part because of the efforts of people like FDR, as much as we might decry his more tyrannical policies.
Right. And there's definitely a bigger conversation there about how much of the wealth that we enjoy is essentially clipped off of the corners of debtor nations too, especially where our actions have suppressed the wages.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, if we view a country as like a banana plantation.
Well, yeah. Well, and I say that to be fair to the Marxists, because one of the very fair points that the Marxists will point out is essentially, there's the Adam Smith story about comparative comparative advantage, right? And it's like, oh yeah, well, here's the thing. Even if these guys in our money are having to pony up 10 bananas for one calculator, right? Let's just say that's our reference, right? 10 bananas for one calculator, when really we know that actually in our country, it's actually a lot more like 3 bananas to a calculator than 10. Well, for one thing, these bananas are coming from the other side of the world, so there's some transportation costs, and we got to get those calculators to the other world, so that adds a little bit. So traded goods are theoretically going to cost more because of the transportation costs. But obviously, why are people transporting them? Well, because of the difference in the availability, the supply of these things in the different countries. You're going to increase the value of your bananas, bringing them to the US. And to the extent that you can get extra bananas for every calculator, it does increase the value of the calculators to move them across to wherever the bananas are. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, but here's the thing. At some point or another, when we did the petrodollar thing, we decided that rather than gambling on people wanting to buy US calculators instead of Chinese calculators, then we decided, why don't we just bully everybody into paying for oil in dollars? And then we will essentially back the dollar with oil. And we've done so through a military policy. Because if you look at people, Gaddafi is a human. I'm sure there are all sorts of things that people could complain about Gaddafi and how the way that he personally lived his life was unethical, or that some of his policies were very intolerant, or whatever your complaint is. But the fact of the matter is, under Muammar Gaddafi, slavery wasn't a thing. And he wanted, silly him, didn't understand the way that the world worked. He wanted, he found out by the end of his life, he thought, hey, I have superior wisdom on how to run a society. I have a position of influence. Bunch of these knuckleheads are obviously not doing so great. I bet if I pull off some charisma, if I demonstrate by running the country in a way that makes their life better, if I write this book, I can influence my people to live better lives, to have happier lives, so that my country can be more successful and a great place to live even after I die. And I'm not here to directly manage it.
He did succeed.
But
they had the highest GDP per capita in Africa.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying. He had the goods, but what got him off the rails? When did things go wrong for him? Because
when all the
West
international jihadists were imported in. So,
but when did that?
It wasn't even.
Why did that happen? Why did that happen?
I think honestly, it was because I think the petrodollar thing is a bit overstated. But I agree with much of what you said. But I think the petrodollar concept is a bit overstated. But
well, here's what I mean, though. Here's what I mean. What happened directly was that where we would have, if he was our guy, we would have intervened and made sure that he didn't fall. As it stands, there's a lot of evidence.
He would be in a totally fine position if not for our involvement.
Correct. And that's what I mean. It's the reason.
And we monkeyed with Twitter specifically to get the jihadis to sick the jihadis on Libya.
Right.
Which we tried to do.
That's what I mean, is that we said what would, and I say we as in not me, but our government said what, the consequence of you actually trying to get ahead for yourself and not playing our game, not dancing to our tune. Because I think Gaddafi, it's not like I declare war against the United States. No, it was just like, I think that I can run my country better if we're using my currency instead of your currency.
And he was partnering with Russia. See, when we were knocking off countries in the Middle East, we were knocking off Russia-aligned countries.
Right.
I don't view it as a petrodollar thing. I view it as a Cold War thing. That anyone who is not, let's say, they're more likely to talk to the KGB than they are to talk to the CIA. The CIA is trying to find a way to murder them.
I just feel like the evidence is that at the very least it went both ways, because again and again I see that we put up with them to a point all over the place, because we are up to the gills with commies ourselves in our universities and our State Department and stuff. I say commies, socialists, whatever, leftists. We'll just say left-leaning, left of center, willing to use the government to impose their will on people, individuals, were very much influential in our State Department and our universities that were feeding these government employees into the government. And I think that there's
Democratic Party.
And that's the thing. Again, like when you look after World War II, then there was massive infiltration of the Democrat Party by communists, and anyone that tried to say so got canceled. That's the thing. If anyone is familiar with the story of Joseph McCarthy, like McCarthyism, they try to blah, blah, blah. And it's sad. I see people way right of center. Well, not super right of center, but, very conservative people, very right liberal, Ben Shapiro types and stuff. It's not just that they don't know. It's that if you try to tell them, they will not believe you about so much of this stuff, because they're basically like, no, Ray, that's not what Reagan said. That's basically what they're going to say. Is they're going to say that's not what Reagan said. That's not what. Who's the other guy? Oh my gosh, who's not Gore? The guy that debated Gore Vidal, the conservative William F. Buckley, right? Like, William F. Buckley didn't say that. William F. Buckley said that McCarthy was actually, un-American, because he's like persecuting the they want to be free speech and run in actors, man. And it's just like, no, actually Joseph McCarthy very specifically came out with a list of people that evidence existed were in communication with working members of the Soviet party,
Yeah,
like with of
they had a budget.
and the thing,
They had a
right?
budget
Well,
for bribing Americans in
right.
Hollywood.
Well, and that's exactly it, though. Is that like for
So
that that for just calling that out, they just he didn't believe it was even possible. He's like, oh, they can't know. The Democrats don't know. They have to know. I'm going to tell them. And then they're going to know. And then they can fix their offices. They can throw out the communist spies out of their offices and say, look at us. We're patriotic Americans. And you can't accuse us of being friendly to the Russians because, look, we even threw the Soviet spies out of our offices.
that
The
was a media
opposite.
fabrication. The Nixon being a bad president was a media fabrication.
Oh, yeah,
The
Nixon got framed. It's
almost
hardcore.
all of the Trump stuff is a media fabrication. It's just it's like
Right.
a reoccurring bullshit thing
Yeah.
that happens every once in a while. They're able to just convince, browbeat enough kind of like hardworking people who don't want to do the research. They just browbeat them.
But why did McCarthy? What was his tactical error to where he ended up falling on his sword rather than picking up that sword and beheading a bunch of Democrats?
I don't
I'll
know
tell
the
you what.
McCarthy,
I do.
stuff
I
well.
do. So here's what it was. His source was broken Soviet code that they couldn't admit that they had broken. So he literally went down in history as a hated man who was unjust to people rather than expose the fact that they had broken the Soviet code that was being used between the spies and the commies so that they wouldn't change it. So he was willing to die a hated man in order to stick it to the commies.
So
I mean, I'm sorry, I admire that.
Yeah,
yes, yeah. I admire that. And I mean, I think it goes beyond patriotism in the sense that I think it was heroism. I don't say that about many people. I don't throw around the hero word. I think that he was a hero who realized, ooh, I screwed up. Rather than letting this hurt my cause, I'm going to sacrifice myself. And I feel like that I respect that move that he made.
And I would stress that let's say that the Democrats and the journalistic establishment and all these different power blocks all get together and say to smear and destroy McCarthy. That doesn't mean that they are all part of one monolithic operating kind of conspiracy. They're all just
competing to cooperate.
It could all be in their best interest to just to kick him in the nuts. So they could all have their own reason for wanting to tear him down.
No, that's what people don't seem to get is when there's, let's just say 50% of any group of people considered, good luck getting 50% of a group of people to have the same reasons for doing the same things. However, if you can convince half of those people for their own reasons to do what you want them to do, and the most effective way of that, of course, is make sure they think it's their idea. What's the best way to make them think it's their idea? It's to set up the incentives to reward the behavior you want to see more of and to punish the behavior you want to see less of, or to make it higher cost, or however you want to spin that. It doesn't even have to be a punishment. You can just, oh, well, we don't want people doing this anymore, so we're going to add a tax. We're going to add a fee. We're going to add a regulation that's going to limit their ability to do it at a rate that will meet the needs of everybody that wants whatever this good or service is. They have options.
In Trump's case, why he got ganged up on was because he just loved fighting people. And
yeah, that's the thing, is he made a show of it. Yeah, no, he made a show of it. I love it because he has always been, and again, like, I'm speaking as someone that didn't support Trump until Hillary's basket of deplorable speech. Okay, I'm not like an early Trump adopter. I was out there defending him from the media lies from day one because I'm not okay with media lies. I didn't have to want him to be elected to think that the media needed pushed back on when they lied about him and they tried to accuse him of stuff that I mean, the one that pissed me off the most was when they went after him for going like, in response to some reporter who happened to have a medical condition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, number one, has he done that to people who don't have a medical condition?
Many times.
Yeah, many such cases, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, like, yeah, does Trump? Do you have some sort of a track record of Trump going around to disable people, going, hey, disabled? No, that's not what Trump does. Trump mocks people that do a bad job of attacking him. Job of attacking him. Because the ones that do a good job, let's be honest, he actually has to respond to it. Most of them, that's not there. Most of them, it essentially runs down to his followers. He has a pretty good idea about what his followers want out of government. And his opponents want something else. So really, all Trump has to do for someone like Mike Pence is like, keep talking, Mike. Please tell everybody how you want to send more money to Ukraine. And, it's not very important to like lower the tax or regulatory burden on the American people. Tell the American people that you're more worried about making sure that a few more Russians end up perishing than whether or not, your grandkids are going to be dealing with debt that is manageable or something that replaced the dollar because the dollar died. Like these are Trump had his work cut out easy when it came to so-called debating these people that are just putting forward these policies that the common people didn't want. The reason why they attacked Trump was because he was a populist specifically. And that's why I think that they want him to be the nominee instead of Vivek Ramaswamy, because they know that Vivek Ramaswamy would win a general election, and that scares them because other people don't know that. People like me know that. People like, I don't know, Seth Rogen know that. People like Bill Maher know that. But probably even people like who's that jerk? The Morning Joe guy, like I'm talking about Joe Scarborough. There you go. Like people like Joe. I don't think he knows. I think that a lot of the talking heads in general, they don't understand what they're getting into. That's why you get these. It's almost embarrassing when they get called journalists when they're obviously presenters. Right, so you'll have.
Joe Scarborough is so cute. You could show a raccoon's asshole and put the West Wing theme song to it, and he would vote for it with tears in his eyes.
He's basically, I was going to say, he's the real establishment critter, is what he is.
He wants that respectability. That's what he wants.
Right, and that's exactly it. Compare that to someone who actually has substance to them. You want to know someone who knows how to use a verbal knife? Freaking what was that, guys? Chris Wallace. Holy crap. That guy, like, he could have worked for the CIA. Like, he does work for the CIA, but I mean, he could have literally been someone relatively high up in an organization like the CIA or the FBI. Instead, he's on TV. And he's one of the ones that they grab to do presidential debates because, him, Chuck Todd is another one. Mm-hmm. These people are not talking heads. These people might as well be intelligence operatives because of their skill level. I'm the first to admit skill when I see it, because of their skill level at corralling the narrative. But then you get these presenters, and it's a train wreck because they can't do the job. They cannot do the job of controlling the narrative when the guests come on. And even, the ones that are actually somewhat there can get thrown off pretty hard when they have a big enough challenge, right? So in the same way we saw Don Lemon just get buried by Vivek Ramaswamy and fired soon afterwards for his utter inability to control the narrative. If you've ever watched Fareed Zakaria,
I think is actually trying to get CNN to hate him.
Oh, sure, because
just
that's
for
free coverage.
name recognition. He's looking for name
Yeah, no,
recognition.
exactly. He wants them to preach about how bad they are to anybody that listens, because that's good advertisement for them. Because
I do
he's
see
like,
him baiting them.
CNN is bad. If they don't like me, then you should.
And in invading them, there is some falsity in that, but that is also cunning. That is cunning politics as well.
Sure. Well, and that's the thing though, is that both the other thing that people need to understand about that is the dog and pony show, the red versus blue. There is a baseline industry of politics, and a lot of it we could do without. But part of that baseline level is the thing to be an effect. You can preach to the choir, but to really excite people, what you need the enemy on the stage with you.
Yeah.
And then you're scratching each other's backs because you're calling them bad, which raises their street cred with their own side, and they're calling you bad, which raises your street cred with your own side. So it doesn't matter if you go out and have a beer with the guy afterwards. What matters is when you're on the stage, then you're arguing that the other person is someone that people should be supporting you to stop.
It's why people like
both
WWE.
Use each other, and that's the thing, is when you look at these power structures, that's usually what it is that both sides are either scratching each other's back, or more to the point, there's someone here that's saying, hey, you go over here, you go over here, you guys are going to scratch each other's backs. And that's most of the time the person that's saying go do this, that's not an elected position. That's not something that people are getting to choose who's doing that. That is, the smoke-filled back rooms type of thing that nowadays is going to be, a private conversation on Slack or whatever. That's the same equivalent of, hey, it doesn't really matter how officially we're running the place. What do we want to happen? We'll make it happen, and then we'll tell a story about it that makes it seem legit. And that's basically been our system for a long time. But the problem is they can't keep up. And they had this idea, I think, that they could use the internet in order to kind of crowdsource that. If they can infect a bunch of people with their ideas, then people will, just go ahead and parrot their ideas en masse. And as long as you can just flood all of the, not just the official content, but the user-made content too, just flood it with your narrative, then it'll crowd out the competing narrative. And it doesn't matter if the competing narrative gets out there, theoretically, they think. Oh, well, it won't matter because we'll drown it out. And what they're finding is that not all narratives are equally compelling. Imagine that.
The problem, I think, with what they've discovered is that they're able to control the rhythm of like online narrative, the narrative flow.
Well, they can make a wave. They haven't figured out how to stop them.
Yeah, but that's right, and this for I think a very specific reason. The only way for them to create and really hypnotize people within what they're trying to project, the only way for them to do that is to really imbue it with massive amounts of very compelling emotion, which is generally negative emotion.
Yeah, although I'm going to throw one bone in that, which is that I think that self-fulfilling prophecies are huge. So if you happen to know about something going on that other people are not aware of, you can use that private information to make predictions and then seem like you're a freaking wizard when it happens. Because what I've learned hardcore over the last couple of years that kind of annoys me with people, kind of annoys me with people, is that it seems if I make a prediction, a nice short-term prediction, like I tell one of my customers, like, hey, it'll be this long until you should expect this to happen, right? Then the customer doesn't have a way of verifying how much of that coming true was my doing and how much of that was the system working the way that it was supposed to, and me knowing about the system versus me saying what I was supposed to say and the system working the way it was intended to, because I didn't have to know. All I had to do was parrot it from someone that did know. So you've got this dynamic where they just don't care how it happened. If you're right, they don't give it a second thought about why you were right. And I think that that tendency is something that politicians abuse in a big way, and that it really is the job of people like me to call them out when they make the predictions about what we probably think that means their involvement is, right? And then whenever they come out later and try to act surprised by it, by the thing that they predicted, then you have people like me calling them on that too, and like, look at this original video where they said this. Oh, look at what they're saying today. Yeah.
So yeah, they're kind of trying to distance themselves from being the authors of the bad situation that they predicted.
Oh my gosh. Like when Biden made it very clear what was going to happen to the pipeline between Germany and Russia. And then when it happened, I don't know what you're talking about. Right?
Yeah, the media is extremely disinterested in that.
And same thing with the Trump getting elected thing. Like he was like, oh yeah, we're going to make sure that he does not get elected again. He will not take power again. We'll make sure. And it's like, oh, and how are you going to do that? And then later on, they start doing stuff that would fulfill that prophecy. And they're just like, I don't know what you're talking about. We're just following the rules, bro. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, they're very good.
Garland, I'm going to not talk about Garland because I'll keep talking about Garland.
And so now talking about there not being any proof of corruption with Biden and Hunter, but then you look into things and it's like all of these process people being like, don't look into this. Oh, you don't have permission to look into this inquiry. You can't subpoena these witnesses.
Right.
And just brick wall after brick wall after brick wall.
Well, here's my thing: is it's like the little kids with the like, okay, show your hand. See, I got nothing. Okay, show your other hand. See, I got nothing. Right, and it's just like we know better. You're not going to use little kid tricks to trick us here, but they don't have to, as long as they're controlling the process that says, oh yeah, the person just said the thing. Your turn. Right. Yes. And that's why the Republicans taking back the House in 2022 actually mattered, is because now you have Republican committees that are doing all of this documentation of what they've found when they looked into paperwork. So they're like, listen, according to the testimony, and it counts as testimony, it's government paperwork. Right?
Yeah, the House is doing
if you put wrong stuff on government paperwork, that's fraud. Like it's big business, right? So they're like, no, look, your agents said this. So we're going to go with that unless you want to start talking about who perjured themselves, in which case that will require even more investigation. You understand that, right? You had people. I'm not a big fan of Thomas Massie because he usually doesn't get stuff done. But I'll tell you what, that's one thing he is good for, is just, hey, you're doing this. The Constitution says this. Like, I mean, that's his shtick, right? And I'm not upset that we have a stick in the mud that doesn't do anything except remind people what the Constitution is all day. So, yeah.
I think if the Democrats can be kept, if they're distracted with their infighting over the primary season, or if there's some kind of distraction, I think if the House Republicans could just continuously build up a body of evidence and subpoena people and get people under oath and do the casework that the FBI slow walked and it tried to bury, they can actually get something done there. Because it's very, very clear, especially now that we saw that Biden was running a pseudonym, a burner email to communicate with his son. It's so
violation. Well, that's a violation of the Presidential Records Act to have a private email that, at least as president. We'll start there. But I mean, there's a lot of
and Joe's kind of
gray areas when he was vice president. We'll say that. I'm not familiar with the law on the specifics when he was vice president, but I know for sure, as a Secretary of State, that when Clinton had her private email server that she was doing government traffic on, that was a violation of I want to say actually that one might be FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. So whether it was the Presidential Records Act or the Freedom of Information Act, like Joe Biden has definitely not been following the law. But here's my thing. I don't think it works to give anyone but Congress impeachment powers, the ability to go after the president. I think that even having the DOJ of a hostile party go after a past president is just a bad idea. I don't think that is something that we want happening. As far as it, to the point of where I would be willing, as long as it was a good reform, I would be willing to back a constitutional amendment that, among other things, basically made it to where you could not charge a sitting or past president with a crime for actions they took in relation to being either a current or past president. However, that would then need to go with some guidelines about,
not becoming a tyrant.
Here's the thing. Like, for instance, Secret Service agents are always going to be with this guy, right? Then what you could potentially do is you could potentially say, hey, Secret Service agents, if it looks like there's about a crime to happen, then you should intervene. Okay? So that right there, you have like sworn reliable witnesses about what's going on. And the president, the ex-president, again, I don't care if it's Trump or Clinton or Carter, if he hasn't died yet, whatever. Like, I do think that Secret Service protection is appropriate. It's peanuts compared to our military expenditures. And I think that one of the benefits of it should be that they are reliable witnesses in the case where somebody accuses. And that's the other thing. Like, people, I think that it would solve a lot of problems to just pay politicians a lot more and then like put onerous rules on them about gifts and stuff. It's like, no, we need to make sure that it's expensive to live in Washington, D.C. It's even more expensive to travel to Washington, D.C. anymore.
Joe, he was like the sugar
would
daddy.
rather pay them all $1 million a year with a $200,000 a year retirement till they die than to deal with purposely. And that's the thing. The big corporations love that crap. They love that if some small business owner ever makes it to Congress, that they're going to be faced with expenses that would make it hard to live unless they are accepting a bunch of gifts from lobbyists. That's not an accident. And I think that we need to attack that problem from both sides of making it way more restrictive about what kinds of gifts they can receive, and of paying them more so that they have no excuse for receiving gifts. And I would say that the same applies to like the Supreme Court. Hearing about this stuff, they're trying to like problematize, oh, Justice Thomas is poor, therefore. I'm like, holy crap, like, what's wrong with you? You're like, this guy on the Supreme Court is too black and too poor, therefore we respect him less? Like, what's your argument here, guys?
I kind of like bribery, provided it's not like foreign.
Well, then that's the other thing, is that I would be way more open towards all bribes must be publicly reported. But the problem is there, I would want a recall process. I'm sorry. Like, at some point or another, I think that we have the technology to where we can have a government website that you have secure logins, and you can change your status at any point from do want to recall to don't want to recall on any of the office holders that you, being registered to vote, would have gotten to vote for in the last election, right? and that if more than, I don't know, 65% of people want a recall election, then they run a new election, something like that. Well,
Well,
what's the problem with that?
shouldn't
It's not in the Constitution right now. We need that
shouldn't
amendment. Just
ExxonMobil be doing a little bribing? You know what I mean? Like the oil companies were the big villains during the Bush era. I remember that. But
right.
now that we're in this era where the Greenpeace people are running around fucking, talking about whatever.
No,
And
no,
uh,
because if you look at it, they're the same people. The social justice activists have taken over the big oil companies and they're running them into the ground because green.
right. But I think that this was something that happened because the oil companies were weak, in a weakened position, and
Yes.
no one was investing in them. And the only
Yes.
people who were investing in them were like, we are going to take you over and make you our little meat puppet. And
Right.
so because they were, they essentially got fucked with. And then you had all these
It wasn't an
pension
accident.
funds investing in
They,
them, and the people who ran the pension funds, BlackRock, Vanguard, and etc., used all their shares from the pension funds to
right.
really ramrod some bullshit
No,
through.
they broke them on purpose.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. They broke them on purpose, and that's their goal. And that's why I have a lot of sympathy for the people that say we need to change our approach to avoiding subversion because our current approach just isn't working. There's
Well,
even with listening to you talk about it, you're basically conceding the idea that because we will not be able to stop all bribery, then it might be more useful to allow it to happen. And again, my thing, I don't even disagree with that. My thing is, if that's the case, there has to be extreme sunshine. And when I mean extreme sunshine, I mean like when you become when an elected official, you lose your all privacy rights. You will have 24/7 surveillance. And again, I'm open to ideas about who's doing, who's physically involved in helping protect you or whatever, just or as an extra witness. But there comes a point at which it's like maybe if we want cops to have body cams, do people in Congress need body cams when they're not viewing classified material? Because like at some
well,
point or another, it that it you have I agree. Like First Amendment, you should be able to bribe people. But the problem is when I say you should be able to bribe them, the problem with this traditional bribe is quid pro quo. So the question is it illegal? Right? And so, yeah, as long as you're bribing people to do things that are legal and that information is getting out to the public, that's great. But what I think people would find is that it would raise the percentage of independently wealthy people in Congress because people would literally start making lists of who takes the most bribes and who takes the fewest bribes and start weeding out the ones that were letting themselves be bought and start more carefully vetting the new people. And once again, what is the primary risk factor in taking a bribe? It's needing more money. And I think we really should be blunting that side of things.
Well, if we're talking about a bribe that's like greasing the wheels, like let's say there's an endangered species of like seal, and like you want to drill oil there, and it's a fuckload of money. So you're willing to throw, let's say, 10 million at a senator who is the deciding vote on letting you, or is going to reassign that environmental protection agency person, get them the fuck out of there so you can drill. And so that's the thing that's going to allow you to drill. So what that indicates is that this drilling project is going to yield at least 10 million in profit, right? Because if it wasn't going to yield 10 million profit, it wouldn't make sense to pay the senator 10 million. So what I'm saying is that there's all of these bribes are all potential business happenings where the amount
but
of
in that case though, what was the cost, right? Where was that profit coming from? That was coming from environmental destruction on the seals, according to the Green Nuts. I don't know whether that's true, but notionally, right? And that's been the problem, is that as we've lost the ability to have good faith assumptions about why it is that people are being restricted from doing things, then it really does hurt the environmental activists and such, just as much as those of us who are more worried about keeping our information sphere free enough that you can sort out what's more likely to be true and what's less likely to be
Well,
true.
look at the
Because
SpaceX
that's
thing.
really where my focus is because it might be ugly and messy. We can make a new currency.
They're doing an entirely new environmental review of the SpaceX launch out of Boca Chica because they blew up one of the starships, and some debris from the starship that exploded landed in a nature preserve. And so they're like, "Oh no, this rocket debris, like we got to hold everything up because all these environmentalists who hate his guts because it's resentment and they hate him because he's rich." And so they're fucking with him. And so they're like, "Oh, he just destroying Mother Earth, Gaia, whatever, by a little piece of a blown up spaceship landed where Bambi is supposed to be." It's just a bunch of bullshit.
It's way more polluting that you have any parts flying around up in orbit. Like if it's on the ground, it's safe. Are you kidding me?
And the fact that he's blowing things up there is actually good, because then you don't have people building residences there. You won't have anyone they're not going to bring their yacht over that way. They're not going to do the cruise because there's things exploding. So the explosions create a non-human zone, which is great. That's the best thing that you could want as an animal.
Yeah.
So
because aside from like human introduced species like house cats, for the most part, humans are some of the most prolific animal killers out there.
Yeah, exactly. So you're creating an area that's too dangerous for anyone to be, and that's great for nature.
Yeah. And the thing is, even when it's radioactive, have you noticed that? Like Chernobyl has all of this, it's got an ecosystem. It's got critters that are just fine. And and you just don't, and you don't go there. And because, you don't want to get cooked. But they're used to getting cooked. And the ones that couldn't hack it, they didn't. The ones that could, they reproduced. Hey, that's nature.
Yeah, you would think that the Greenpeace people would want more reckless nuclear power plants, because
Well, I was going to say, or they would want global climate change in a way that would pressure a whole bunch of species in a different direction. And I mean, same thing with humans, right? If you listen to their antinatalist, takes, then they're just like, we need fewer humans. And well, okay, so why wouldn't it be helpful to like if you raise the sea level by 4 or 5 feet, then half of these island nations are just underwater, and doesn't that just like lessen the impact that humans are having on the earth? They don't have an internally consistent message because they're arguing both. It's both sides. They're arguing both sides, and whichever side you adhere to, they use the other side to scoop you up. I mean, that's how that works. Like
I'm just buying real estate in the Arctic because those beaches are going to get swimmable, and that's going to be the place to be. See, that's pragmatism.
I think that's at least 120 years out. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm going to say that's at least 120 years out.
It's a long-term investment. Hey,
greater fool theory. As long as someone else agrees with you, you can sell it more for later. And inflation means that, and that's the other thing. Inflation is so useful to so many people. Inflation means that they could buy it. You could buy it now, and then your price is locked in now. And so 120 years from now, when dollars are worth peanuts and you only pay, and over the life of your loan, you paying off this loan over 30 years, you just paid in dollars that were worth less and less every year, right? And then by the time that it was all said and done, then yeah, if you want to sell it, even if it's not 120 years later, if it still looks like it's going to be usable, well, you probably, get back whatever that current value is going to be hugely more than what you paid, because it's not, inflation happened. So, and that's the thing, is that people don't understand that the everyday business owners run on a much smaller version of that. and that, you know, depending on the business, you've got a different time frame. But I know that a lot of the businesses I'm familiar with, you essentially are trying to order a truck to be delivered a week from now. So you've actually got another truck that's coming in a few days, and then the truck after that is the one that you're ordering. So you can be in situations where if you don't plan ahead, then you're going to have to wait another week to get the stuff that you need now.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? So and that most businesses have some sort of inventory. And so when there's two sides to that. On the one hand, you say, well, businesses are going to want to buy their inventory as early as possible, especially in an inflationary environment, which, by the way, drives inflation. Just pointing out that dynamic. Because everybody is trying to scramble for the resources at the same time before they get more scarce. Guess what? That makes them more scarce. So
short-term trends build on each other a lot.
Right.
That's why you got that big wave pattern.
From a free market perspective, that's a good thing, because what does that do? That raises the price. What does that mean? It raises the reward for someone who's able to produce or secure this and bring it to market.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and it's all about who can make a profit off of what. Like even debt.
Right.
If
and when
debt
that
is
number
not bad
goes up,
necessarily if it's productive debt.
Right. Well, when that market number goes up of the price that the market will bear, right? The price the market will bear will go up. Then all other things equal, if the government isn't getting in the way, then to the extent that there is a profit to be made there, people are going to start running the numbers. How can I get into this game? How can I be the one that's selling this? By the time that I actually get my operation going, what are the odds that other people had the same idea, and the competition is going to push the market price back down? So you've got all of these questions, and it's funny because from my perspective, it's very much a like cold in the middle situation, in the sense that if you've got a relatively low investment to get in the game, a lot of people are going to do that, because right now I can get involved. I can throw around money that I already have and get what I need to make more money just based off of getting this, selling this, whatever.
Yes.
So it's going to drive the profit to zero in short order. And I mean, that's something that the Marxists love to harp on, right? Is that it's going to price, and I say the profit, what I mean, to be very specific, is that by the time that you run the costs of doing business, then you're the next person that looks at whether or not they can compete is like, why would I bother? Right. But on the flip side,
you want
if there's very high barriers,
you want to farm that demand. If there's a big slice of demand and you can get a margin on it, you want all of that demand. So you could farm the margin off the whole thing. You don't want anyone else coming in and getting a slice and competing with you.
Right. Which is why if there's a very low barrier to entry, a lot of the time you're going to pass on that. Right?
Yeah.
Like anyone can do this. Anyone can do this. Why am I going to waste my time doing something that anyone can do? That's not going to be profitable. There's so, if it doesn't matter how much demand there is, if the supply is also nearly infinite, you're not making money.
The most underrated investment is the intellectual investment. So if it's an easy idea that everybody could think of, it gets flooded instantly. The really good investments require intellectual investment that puts a huge bar to entry. Then you don't need capital investment. You don't need some kind of other leverage. You just need the idea.
And that just absolutely wrecks the Marxists, because remember that from their point of view, you have this labor theory of value. And, per the traditional Austrian critique, they don't have the numbers to calculate it. But their notion is that there's definitely some surplus value, and that whoever is the owner is definitely stealing it.
Well, to be honest, sometimes the industry is so crowded, you need to zap, let's say 90% of the people who are like it's my dream to get into growing marijuana. It's like, that's great. Unfortunately, the market demand is here, and there are this many of you. So you're going to be selling your product for nothing. And
Well, and that's
we,
the funny part there is that I'm in a state that recently legalized it, and we have a state next door that actually still has it only medical, and it's way cheaper in the state next door for a couple of reasons. They've got a lower minimum wage and thus lower cost of living. They also are just paying their people less in general, right? So literally the people working on it are getting paid less. But you know what? When you start looking at the numbers, you're like, well, that's not most of it. Is it really? I don't think labor costs are really what's pushing this. When you look at it, it's the difference in regulations. So apparently the regulations are just so onerous here in this state that they just literally, it's a stretch. Like when I have to buy in this state for various reasons, then like I basically get the cheapest, most commodified version of what I use. In this case, it's called RSO. But yeah, I mean, it's basically, again, it's literally like 80% medicine, 20% naturally occurring oils that are in the plants, whatever. Compared to the gummies that I prefer to get from Oklahoma. And again, legally, there's an agreement between the states that allows that to happen. And which again, that's, I bet the Missouri, and that's the thing, the poor sellers over here in Missouri are just banking on the ignorance and low effort of the people who live here. Because if they wanted to jump through some hoops and invest in a buyer's card for Oklahoma based on their Missouri diagnosis, then they can get, depending on what you're getting, it's not just that it is like whatever percent more, but it's the products themselves are different, and that what I like from Oklahoma is going to be packages that have 10 gummies and 2,000 milligrams of THC in them. And the thing is that if I go to the local shop and I want to buy their house brand of gummies, then those are 10 gummies that have a total of 100 milligrams, not 2,000, 100 of THC. So what's the price difference between those two? Well, what I was paying for the 2,000 milligrams when they're, again, legally purchased through Oklahoma was, after taxes, about $60. If you tried to meet that number on the basic option there that's sold in at the house brand at my local dispensary, then you have to buy 20 of them, and they're about a third the cost. So it's like 6 or 7 times cheaper because of lower regulations, essentially. Right. And the thing is, it's not that there's an overstock either, because like the last time that I got a batch of stuff from Oklahoma, I ended up having to settle for a bunch of 1,000 milligram gummies that were not as good of a rate. They were close, like they look beautiful compared to Missouri prices, but it was still painful compared to them actually having my thing in stock. Right. So there's literally, on the one hand, you can say, well, on the one hand, yeah, there's room for the supply to go up in Oklahoma if they raise the price. Well, that's probably true. But on the flip side, it's the reason why Missouri has such terrible prices has everything to do with the government artificially inflating the cost of production. Now, what else does that do? It makes it harder to sell, right? So you end up with, when like various forms of government price fixing usually do, when you have the government raise the price of something artificially, then you basically get excesses of them. You get over investment in production of something that people don't actually necessarily want. And then you get this underinvestment in the stuff that they actually do want. And it's not an accident. Government is actively intervening and trying to steer your dollars away from the things they don't approve of, that don't benefit whatever their motives are, to something that does benefit whatever their motives are. And the thing is that at some point or another, I know certain, like Thomas Massey isn't out there doing that. Well, that's great, but most members of Congress aren't Thomas Massey, and historically, I think it's naive to look back and say, "Oh man, it wasn't until X and such a year that they started doing this." It's just like, I mean, you can look at the founding fathers and what they warned about, and then you can look in the next 20 years after they warned about it and already see the things that they warned about. And a lot of the time, very specific warnings like, hey, don't do the party thing or else you're going to have factionalism. Oh, what happened? Right. And we can look back and say there was never a chance that parties weren't going to form. There's game theoretical reasons why parties were going to form.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think that that's an important challenge for those of us who think that we want to reform things, is that we have to make sure that the system that we're putting forward doesn't have a giant freaking vulnerability that's like, as long as people don't do this, we'll be fine.
Right.
Because it's almost always set up to where people are incentivized to do the thing that you'll be fine if they don't do.
Yeah, look at how America was built. America was built by people wise enough to understand that human beings were going to behave terribly.
Mm-hmm.
And you're managing the human nature. You're managing nature by trying to channel it in an intelligent way, rather than trying to pretend that it doesn't exist.
And that's the terrible part, is that, they just, it doesn't make sense to people who haven't studied Hegel so much. And that's a hard one, because I understand, like, I'm not dissing on people that could never wrap their brains around Hegel, because it's a different kind of thinking. He literally discovered a different kind of thinking that is just as different as as a hacksaw is from a circular saw, right? Like there's different deployments. Like, yeah, he cuts, cool, but so
yeah, I never really looked into Hegel.
Here's a really, I'm not going to start trying to tell you Hegel. What I'm going to tell you is what's important to me about Hegel, which is the idea that there is there's the world of physics, right? And then there's the symbolic. And what a lot of people miss about determinist attitudes is the misperceptions and the deceptions that people are involved with. Because if all of us perfectly understood what was happening around us, we would behave in more or less a deterministic fashion. But guy who does great work on this, R. Backer over at 3 Pound Brain blog, he calls it heuristic neglect theory of consciousness. So basically what makes us human is that spotlight effect, where we're only paying attention to some of our sensory input and the rest of it is kind of on the back burner, right? And to the extent that we, our bodies don't have perfect sensory perception, and it's to the extent that we're perceiving things, what about all the things we aren't perceiving? So we have zero chance of getting all of the relevant information to predict the system as individuals, and it would be prohibitive to calculate it. Cool. But we just say, but it's determinist, because if we could calculate it, but one of the consequences of human minds reflecting imperfectly the universe is that there are as many conceptions of the past as there are minds, and they're going to have a different slice of the past. they're going to understand it differently. It's going to have different flaws in the difference between what actually happened and what they recollect about it. And those are going to build in terms of their beliefs about the universe. And again, even if they remember perfectly, if they're relying on testimony from an imperfect human that misunderstood their situation or chose to be deceptive about the information that they were relaying, what you end up with is something that you can call it deterministic if you want, but it's like physics doesn't solve for this.
Yeah,
you
people
have
don't tend to notice what they need to notice until they experience massive pain.
Right, and that's exactly it. Is that someone who wants to be deceptive could very much find a hidden or disguised way to cause someone pain and then deceive them about the source of that pain in order to get them to lash out at an entity which was not responsible for their pain.
Yeah.
Right?
Guilt.
And so, right. Exactly. And humans, the most effective way for humans to lie is to believe their own lies. So you don't want, if you're a high level muckety muck in a subversive leftist movement, you don't want the little people to understand what's going on. You want the little people to have the innocent version to where they think that they're the good guys. They have nothing to hide. And the people that they're following, the reason why they're hiding stuff is because if the bad guys knew what their plans were, the bad guys could thwart their plans. Perfectly reasonable, right?
Yeah, you want
except that what that does is that it gives a pass on the agency of the followers. So I mean, if we want to have lowered expectations and we just say only the people who choose to be agential are going to be agential and everybody else is fair game for vulgar manipulation. I have friends that think that. That's not my view, but I have friends that think that, and I don't have a logical argument against it. It's because the fact of the matter is the reasons why I resist that idea, they're not based on falsifiable ideas of my own. They're based on unfalsifiable premises, what I believe about the arrangement of the universe that isn't falsifiable, right? So my thing is, if we're going to persuade the average person that that treating the NPCs like cattle is not going to be to their advantage without regard to what they think about it ethically, then we have to be aware of that dynamic, and we have to be aware of the idea that even if we think that everybody should be agential, that everybody should take ownership of their own decisions, it's not just that that's not how humans are all wired. It's that there are whole groups of humans that are disproportionately present in certain demographics that have completely different predispositions that are just not in the same universe as conversations about ownership and being an agent and being responsible about how you influence the world. These are the people that we're still trying to explain. No, when she says no, you have to stop. But she's a woman. I know, but here we listen to women when they say to stop. Like that's the part of the conversation that we're at with so many of these people. And again, because we're not fascists and we're not planning on just removing the people from society that are less useful to us, then we need a system that has the incentives so obvious that people will voluntarily choose to behave because they don't like what happens when they don't. And we've gotten so far away from that, not just on street thugs, but on the white collar criminals in banks and big corporations and universities and Congress. It's just we don't give them consequences anymore.
I treat people like they have agency, even if they don't, they don't have the capability for it.
No, me too. Me too. I'm
Um,
like, if they I'm going to give them the opportunity, and if they don't take it, that's on them. That's my take.
Definitely. And when they fail to live up to that, see the double-edged sword of me viewing that everyone has hope is that everyone can let me down.
Yeah, sure.
And I will not hide that. When somebody acts like a robot and they don't take responsibility or agency for what it is they're doing, I will just be let down. And I'll let them see it.
Yeah.
I was like, I wish, I wish you were better than that. And that a
Yeah.
lot of people come at me and they're like, man, you're so condescending. You're blah, 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 blah. It's like, what I am is honest. I'm
Right.
honest, and I'm holding you to as high a standard as I hold myself because I don't think I'm superior to you.
Yeah, and that's where you and I are different, by the way. I have the exact opposite, which is I absolutely hold myself to a higher standard because I don't think that most people choose to hold themselves to a standard.
Oh, they
And
certainly don't.
I
Yeah.
and I don't think that it's a reasonable expectation on my part that they're going to behave that way. And I guess that's easier for me with, I don't talk about it a whole lot. I'm obviously not neurotypical. I think it's easier for me because when I grew up, it didn't work to project how I do things onto other people. Like
Right.
how I would feel about something to try to empathize with them. That wasn't a working thing because I'd be like, if I tried to apply that, I have such different standards than most people that it would not be what they wanted. It would be what I wanted, right? And so if
Yeah.
I tried to model their thought life off of my thought life, I'm going to have a bad time. I'm going to be less effective at getting the responses from the world, especially from other people that I'm intending to get with my actions. So
Yeah.
that's why, and also on a level of like the term the bigotry of low expectations, I think institutionally we should avoid that the rules need to be structured in a neutral manner that clearly sorts who can meet a standard and who cannot meet a standard, because standards should be tailored to the needs of the function for the standard. Like that's I just it bothers me that we have to say that, but we have all of these other people that are out there saying that we need to set our standards based on something else, right?
Yeah.
And that's my baseline thing, is that when I look at my life experience, I have a more fulfilling life when I basically do have the bigotry of low expectations towards 99% of other people and hold myself to hold a higher standard. And I'm not ashamed to say I have a sense of pride about holding myself to a higher standard and not expecting other people to conform to my standard. So I'm in favor of having social standards encoded in the law and enforced in a fair and consistent way for everybody. But that's with the understanding that certain types of people are going to disproportionately fail to live up to those standards, and that because they do so, they do need to be removed from society so they can't screw it up for the rest of us.
And I think in monarchical systems, the people who are
Which
holding
I'm a fan
themselves
of.
to yeah, sure, they're good. There is a very interesting world order. Um, uh, People holding themselves to high standards of various types, be it aesthetically or morally or intellectually.
Aristocracy, the
That was
original
all
idea, was
aristocratic. Yeah,
rule by the best of us, right?
exactly. Yeah, that's right. So it's a very aristocratic notion, and it is good to really hold yourself to a high standard. Um, and also, I agree with you that you should have shaping functions in a healthy society. I think capitalism is one of the most powerful shaping functions there is, because not only let's say, Dollar General is having a bad quarter because there's too much
Okay.
theft.
Yeah.
Now, if there's too much theft and the net income is going down because it's a less efficient you're losing all that money from the theft,
Right.
then it creates a situation where it's like your company is either going to no longer be the most competitive dollar store, or you're going to find a way to deal with this theft. And this is
Right.
how my kind of like no rules kind of like bribery thing comes in, is that Dollar General has a massive incentive in wherever their locally their power base is, to
Right.
create the conditions where that theft no longer occurs. So
Right.
the river of capitalism itself flowing through that community, Dollar General over here creates prison policy over here.
Yeah.
That you're sweeping out dysgenic elements into the prisons. So
You're doing
I
such a bad job at that. That's what kills me, is that
yeah,
when I look at what I'll sorry to interrupt, but I'm just
no,
saying,
sorry.
when I look at what made the West great, and England in particular great,
Mm-hmm.
it was that they executed teenage criminals. They would execute criminals before they could make more criminals,
Yeah, and they're
before
probably a
they could pass
very
on the genes that predisposed them to
yes.
behave in a manner that was considered criminal. And just to remind people, crime didn't come from, it wasn't like people sat around and they're like, hey, let's like cast some lots to see what laws we should have. No,
Right.
it was literally, the law is rooted in preventing violence that would otherwise happen. That's what the
Mhm.
law is about. So, and to keep the violence orderly, right? So that was the big thing, is, instead of setting up these feuds where we're going to fight each other over, oh, you killed one of our guys, you killed one of our guys, whatever, that they're going to be like, hey, let's get it all there out in the open. Let's show who is guilty, who is innocent. And then if we know that they're guilty, well, then we're not going to feel bad about throwing the book at them. And the people that are on their quote team should also be okay with this, because
Right.
both teams are agreeing to this set of rules that we're all going to follow. And again, what has happened in our society? We've lost that. Not among us, but between the us and the them.
And even then, you would want to hunt the criminals, and you would want to execute or remove the weakest of the criminals, in the same way as like a lion chasing a bunch of zebras. And this creates stronger and stronger criminals. And this is a good thing, because then your society is becoming stronger at
Right.
dealing
And
with that type of criminal element. So you can't have, even if someone from abroad comes in with a skill set and is quite good at a certain kind of exploitation, you've already built this massive resistance to that kind of
so
exploitation.
my wife and I actually watched Goodfellas again last night. So
Mm.
that principle is fresh in my mind.
Really? Where does see? It's been a long time since I watched Goodfellas.
So here's the basic premise of it was, they start off the movie in a weird situation, but then like they do a flashback, and basically this kid grew up in the mob,
Mm-hmm.
but he got to a certain age, and instead of just going directly to Paulie, then he was going to Jimmy, who was selling drugs, which is something Paulie didn't approve of.
Mm.
And so he gets caught up on this side business. And by the time you get to where the movie cut out, you now realize why it is such a problem that the person in the trunk was making noise, and that they had to go ahead and like shoot him
Mm-hmm.
multiple times. You're just like, by the time that like you do the catch up, you're like, oh, I get why we started here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, that Paulie didn't even want to sell drugs. What Paulie was 100% in the protection racket.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, well, what's the protection racket? Well, it's a real service. It is. And it's essentially the same one that our government provides, which means that mobsters only have an opportunity when there's a failure of local government to provide that level of involvement and care in right in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Because and like you said, what happened? Well, Paulie just bribe the cops. And when you start listening to the economics of the situation, you realize that it sounds really unsustainable. Like maybe someone could run the numbers, but it sounds like they're just stealing too much stuff that is going through there. And maybe that was the liberty of the people that made the movie, but they really were. They had such a lock on the peer workers and such that when something came that they wanted, they'd just move it. And like they were talking about the lobsters or whatever, I think it was like the lobsters coming through, and like yeah, they just straight up like, and the cops pull up and they're like, hey guys, what's going on? And Paulie walks over, he's like, hey guys, I got you some lobsters.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome, thanks man. Like it's when you're looking at what the damages that crime is doing, it's not there right now, right? Like what are some of the possible damages? You could discourage using that town as a business to move product in the future. You could destroy a bunch of jobs of these dock workers if people ever get the idea that, oh, I don't want to use this dock. Right? I don't want to send my stuff through this port because whatever. But usually before you get there, you're going to be like, oh, well, it's a criminal element. Let's try to get the law involved to stop the crime. So really, Paulie, in a way, was being a little bit short-sighted in assuming that he could just buy off whoever asks questions indefinitely.
Yeah,
because at some point or another, you're going to get someone from the FBI who is too honest, or too honest, too clean, whatever, or too ambitious to where they want promotion more than they want a bribe.
Or they could represent the interests of injured parties who are having their stuff
exactly. Absolutely, they could be
dirty in another way by a different faction.
Right. They could have literally had someone approach them in a university and say, listen, buddy, I have a proposition for you. I need you to get into the FBI. You're already on this track record. I have knowledge of these criminals. I will totally help hook you up with evidence to prosecute them if you can get yourself into a position in the FBI.
Yes.
It's so, and if that sounds, oh, that's a far-fetched conspiracy theory. People don't understand how much money is involved and how many people that can involve. And the fact of the matter is, like you said, if you take a company that, if you somehow took an anonymous survey of its members and said the question was essentially, with an investment of $1 million in lobbying, the company can increase future profits by 10% for an unknown number of years. Oh, wait, $1 million? How many millions do we move every year? Why are we leaving money on the table?
Right. Easy.
And so that's, again, that's why I think that right now they are purposely leaving that vulnerability of Congress people who are allowed to receive certain kinds of gifts, kind of, sort of. There's loopholes everywhere. They have Congress people that, even though it's literally illegal now for them to do insider trading, there's no teeth as far as and I don't think that's a problem with the law. I think that's a problem with the DOJ. I haven't looked deeply into it.
There's some
I have high regard for Josh Hawley, who is heavily involved in writing that law, and he is, he's someone who's qualified to be Attorney General of the U.S. He's been I want to say he's been Attorney General at some point in Missouri. Like that guy. I don't think that's the law is so terrible issue. I think that is the people who are supposed to be enforcing the law on Congress just are not the kind of people that have a wish to do so.
Yeah, they call it prosecutorial discretion.
Right. And that goes for both sides of the aisle too, because I don't know how many people on that I would consider good people are going to engage in insider trading. I would hope very few of them. Maybe they are. I don't know. But there's a whole crap ton of people who have been in Congress for decades that got used to being able to do that, that got rich in part by doing that, that are that and that's the other sad part, right? Is that let's say that that law had been effective at ending it. It didn't undo the damage,
I
right?
don't understand
And
that law. If I walk into a Cava, right, it's a restaurant, and I have a
mhm,
bowl of their food and it's
mhm,
particularly good,
mhm.
I have knowledge that other investors don't have, right?
But you weren't given that knowledge as part of your fiduciary duties. You were not given that knowledge for the express purpose of doing something for the company.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
when you have
I was just doing
privileged
that to enrich
information,
myself because I want to make an investment, but I want to
well,
check.
yeah. So here's the difference. Let's say that you had knowledge of that the owner planned on shutting down half of the locations because
Hmm.
even some of them that were marginally profitable were too high risk for the possibility of recessionary situation within the next couple of years. They want to downsize before the everything starts hitting fire sale prices. They
Very
want to be
smart.
in a good position to be lean going into the recession. Okay,
Hmm.
but
Good
but
business plan.
notice 6 months from now. And so if you, with that knowledge, go selling stuff and then the price goes down a bunch because when the news comes out, you open yourself up to being prosecuted for insider trading because the only reason why you made that deal was, why you sold when you did was because of your knowledge of the future happening, right?
Right.
Now, granted, the more time there is, the more plausible deniability there is unless there's direct evidence.
Hmm.
Oh, but that's part of why we require these people to keep so many records when they're working in certain privileged, high end access to classified information, access to auditing companies, depending on what's going on. So that's the thing. Members of Congress can see the same because they have classified privilege. They're allowed to look at information that the public, it's not just that, like, oh, they're hiding it from the public. No, they aren't allowed to show it to the public because that information is private to the business that was audited by the government because there was some telltale that they might not have been giving the government the right numbers, or they might have left something off that was important. They might have said that they were doing something they weren't, that they weren't doing something they were. Whatever that gap is between the representation to the government and what the government alleges that they actually did instead,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
so members of Congress can get that privileged information in various ways, and up until Josh Hawley like made a stink of it, it was just legal. It was just straight up legal. And now you've got it to a point where, because of innocent until proven guilty, it's just gotten to a point where, because no one wants to even try to prove them guilty, then you now have an exchange traded fund that, in the same way that you have an exchange traded fund that is like um pro, what was it, there's the Kramer fund and the inverse Kramer fund. So if you want to
Yeah.
directly like basically like short anything that he's shorting and like buy anything that he's shorting, then like you can go for the inverse Kramer fund. Well,
Inverse
so there's
Kramer.
totally,
SPAIM.
someone did this with Nancy Pelosi. Like, someone is out there gathering the information as soon as it's public and releasing it to the public, saying, if you want to invest like Nancy Pelosi, here's how you do it,
Nancy
right?
Pelosi
It's
ETF.
Yeah, and I don't remember if they made an ETF for that one or not, or whether they structured it different. I just know I remember Dr. Stephen Turley, one of the conservative nationalist populists I like listening to. I remember he had on an advertisement for this guy that's part of what they do, is that they gather the information about what Congress, like specific members that have a history of insider trading, are buying and selling, and they make it public. And if you want to say, oh, well, you know what? If they're not going to stop her, they can't stop me. And you do increase your odds of profiting off of illegal activity that was going to happen anyway, essentially.
I like
And I
these.
mean, you
I
can
like
you
these
can make
picks. Apart from Disney, I don't. I think Disney has really fucked itself. But apart from Disney, I like these picks: Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, Salesforce, Nvidia, CrowdStrike. I also don't really like CrowdStrike. I think bigger players have a.
CrowdStrike has a history. They're part of the crimes that went on in Ukraine, among other things.
Yeah, but there are much better cybersecurity firms, and CrowdStrike's not very capital efficient. They're always losing money.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and how do they get away with it? Because they're not in it for the money.
yeah, probably infinite money bags. But you know, you could look at a Palantir or a Google or a Microsoft. They're extremely profitable and they're very good at cybersecurity. And they're corrupt. They're in with the right people. They're
Uh,
beloved in the West, as
I
you
was gonna
might.
say, I out of that crowd, I'm actually a fan of Palantir, but yeah.
Yeah, Palantir is quite good, and they're profitable, and their runway is they're doing much better than CrowdStrike. So it's amazing to me that CrowdStrike is on this list and that a Palantir isn't. I
Well,
would
because
really,
again, Palantir is owned by Peter Thiel, who
yes,
is not one of their friends.
yeah, he's a Trump guy, so there's no way
Yeah, and he's
there.
not. To be clear, he's not my guy. Like
Mm,
he is less my guy than Elon Musk, actually.
mm.
But I still, and a
Is
lot of
he
that comes
slash
from his
our guy?
obsession with Rene Girard, and me and Girard have some nuanced fights. We'll say that.
Well, I mean, his runway from PayPal to who was he backing? He was backing the Weinsteins, and then he was. I mean, he's quite an influential man.
Well, I mean, yeah, Eric Weinstein was working for Peter Thiel's whatever capital. Yeah,
Yeah, which is
but and that's
probably just
dude,
uh,
it's oh man, Weinstein. I'm not gonna get started on because again, that's
I like
every
Eric.
time I watch 3 hours of him, I have 9 hours of something to say. So
Eric is definitely a narcissist, but at least he's
yeah,
fun.
yeah, no, he's here's the thing. Like, let me be clear. Like when I talk about like who would I snap my finger and make president of the United States, like yeah, that's Coleman Hughes. That's Michael Schellenberger. Okay,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is not Eric Weinstein. Let's not get confused here. But you know what? It isn't Brett Weinstein either. And I love that guy. I really, as a person, I
yes,
love the heck out of him. He
yes,
has his progressive feelings give him a blind spot towards certain right-wing realities. That's and I watch definitely more Brett than Eric. I'll say that.
yeah.
Because they fill completely different roles in this world. And unfortunately, the truth of the matter is, much like I don't get to watch much Lex Friedman. I don't, because my time always goes to bigger things. Like,
Mhm.
unfortunately, the shape of the world is if it's a great Tom Ballou video or a great Lex Friedman video, it's not hard because the fact of the matter is Lex might be a special kind of host,
Hmm.
but Tom Ballou is like next level and can actually engage with the guests' ideas on a level of experience, which
Lex
is
kind of has
awesome.
a soft glove with it, kind of like a naive, childlike, soft approach,
Yes. Yeah.
which
And
is
and I
great.
don't and I'm not upset about him. I think that the world is better off hearing what his guests have to say. And
Yeah.
I think that and I'm not knocking his hosting. I don't avoid his hosting. It's just the fact of the matter is, much like Dave Rubin, and honestly, for a long time, once Sam Harris started getting Trump derangement syndrome, he didn't stop inviting good guests. So I'll admit, I stayed sub to him probably a solid year or two on his website, $2 a month, and watched his excellent guests when I had time. And just honestly, with my kids, Sam Harris is one of the ones that basically fell off of my watching habits, and I stopped pitching in my $2 a month to hear him talk about how he would rather that
he would rather Hunter be abusing children.
I was gonna say, yeah. And that's the thing, is that like at some point or another, there's a reason why utilitarianism isn't a popular idea, and why only people that are very ivory tower, very heads in the clouds, like removed from normal life, think that utilitarianism is a working idea.
I think rule utilitarianism is better. But rule utilitarianism eventually, when you squint at it hard enough, becomes virtue ethics. Because good rules are virtues, right?
Right. And that's been my thing too, about like I argue from a position, because it's what I believe, of compatibilism and consequentialism. And I'm not shy about saying I think deontology is cancer, in the sense that deontology done right, in the same way that socialism done right ends up as fascism, deontology done right ends up as consequentialism that thinks past step one, as far as I'm concerned. If your intention is in setting out a list of principles that are going to be privileged, and if you're hierarching them in a way that people don't get confused, there's only one right way to choose, right? That as long as they properly identify their situation, there is a right answer of how to act properly. Like, sure, you can call that deontology, but it's consequentialism. You're structuring your hierarchy of principle based off of the downstream consequences of the decisions that you're making. So when I hear people complain about my relativism, or that consequentialism is relativism, I just don't agree. And if they care, I'll take the time to tell them why.
I think that would have to be a discussion for another time. I'm getting a little burned out.
You're totally, and that's another thing. Hi to the crowd. People are always allowed to disagree with me on my channel. So, sure. and I'm happy to leave it there when we don't have time to talk about it too. Notice I'm not like, you're stupid for thinking different than,
No, it's just, we're gonna be talking about ethics. There'd have to be another. I'm just too tired.
No, you're good. Towards that, let me real quick see if there was anything I had specifically thought that we wanted. Let's see here. So the big thing that I think we've kind of leaned away from, that we can probably wrap it up with, is just you had put like the green credits and stuff. So basically, I mean, my first insight on that issue is, of course, hey, look, government is acting with the rubber stamp, the label of this is what we're doing. But when you look at what they're doing, it seems like they have different priorities that they're not being honest about.
I really like the concept of the credit system. I think it's one of the most insidious methods of pulling a lever on the free market without sacrificing the free market itself.
Right.
In terms of, and you don't only have to do it with like eco stuff. You could, like, let's say you're very interested in like wages and like workers' rights and like creating a good livable middle class. You could attach to S&P 500 companies. This is something that the woke people have done very well. You could attach certain, you could say, okay, for every person that you have hired who you're paying X amount of money within a threshold, within a sliding scale, this would be like a good income credit. So you're paying someone high. This is a good
Mm-hmm.
income credit. You're able to sell this good income credit to somebody who's paying people shit on
Mm-hmm.
a free marketplace. So if you have a lot of people paying people very well, the good income credits aren't worth that much because there's a ton of them, right? But
Right.
so the incentives disappear as it goes up. But if people get paid very little, then the good income
Mm-hmm.
credit is worth a great deal because they're rare. So that means it creates this massive incentive for companies to actually pay good money. And
Not to
obviously,
everybody, but on average.
yeah, and it also allows for dynamism. So you would have some companies. Look, some companies the pay isn't going to be very good, and there are room for those companies as long as they exist in balance with companies where the
Right.
pay is. And as long as that's true, then it kind of creates an equilibrium. The green credits did the same thing. It says, look, burn fossil fuels. That's great. That's fine. But as you burn fossil fuels, you need to buy a certain number of offset credits from people who are engaged in green activities. And so if there's a ton of green companies, they're cheap, these credits. They're a dime a
Right.
dozen. But if there's almost none, then the green companies getting these credits are getting a ton of money.
You
So
know,
it creates a
yeah,
natural equilibrium.
right. And I was going to say part of your first example though really about like if we were trying to lower the amount of pollution, if we were trying to raise the level of average wages,
Mm-hmm.
reminded me of actually a really important dynamic that I think we have to be really careful about on regulation, especially those of us who are used to quote letting the market handle it, because
Mm-hmm.
that should be our default. Like we shouldn't have to get involved unless there's a reason. We should
Mm-hmm.
stay out of it. If you're not causing what's the words iatrogenic, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're
Ride the
not
wave.
causing harm right now and you get involved, you could cause harm. So maybe don't, that kind of principle.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, in general, I think that we have to be more mindful and more careful about stuff that does incentivize and disincentivize certain types of hiring patterns. Because what I've seen in my life is that the pattern that our society is working off of right now is essentially that the government is going to subsidize only the people that fall below a certain threshold of income.
Mm-hmm.
And but that threshold of income is above a 40-hour work week level of income at minimum wage for the head of a household with a wife and two kids, or the equivalent family structure, right? A four-person that there's one income,
Mm-hmm.
and theoretically you need a parent to stay home with the kids, at least for the initial few years, right?
Yeah.
And so what you end up with is what does that actually kind of incentivize? Well, it means that it incentivizes people that are stuck where that essentially, if they tried to do better for themselves, they would be losing benefits faster than they're gaining them.
Mm-hmm.
But more to the point, if you have a decent floor to begin with, they don't need more money. So the purpose of getting more money would be to save and get ahead in life.
Mm-hmm.
Except that in too many cases, a lot of these programs that are helping out have things that discourage that, or things that could even, depending on, if you're that can screw up your ability to do that. They'll threaten to cut off your benefits depending on where that money is coming from. So what you end up with is this system where someone like Walmart just isn't incentivized to pay more than, I mean, they might want a premium on getting the better workers, so they'll pay like $1 or $2 above minimum wage so that they aren't scraping the bottom of the barrel. But what they end up with is, and again, I speak of this situation. I'm not going to go into details, but I speak of it of personal knowledge, that you get people like me essentially underemployed because I could take on a harder job and that would pay marginally more, and it would be disproportionately more, we'll say, effort on my part, if you count, I guess, what you call emotional labor, right? That, like, my psychic displeasure of having to change from a job that I love that doesn't pay well to a job that pays slightly better but I don't love it. Okay, come on. The human thing to do is going to be to stay at the lower paying job that you like. And the thing is, what's one of the reasons why someone like me might appreciate a lower paying job? I'm not being competed with by people at my level. I am the big frog in the little pond, and my customers love me, and my managers want to work with me, right? So I'm in that building. I am the government's gift to them. Okay? They can't afford to hire me for what I'm worth. They can't afford to hire me for what my family needs to support me.
Right.
But they don't have to, because the government is backstopping low-wage workers. So when people don't look at that effect and all of the warpings that throws into the job market, and all of the warping that throws into all of the numbers that flow from people that make close enough to minimum wage that the government is partially subsidizing the workers for these companies. You know, how much of an in-kind contribution is that system is feeding my employer me for the same, for $1 an hour more than they could pick up a literal homeless person, which they've done in the past few months. They literally did end up giving a shot and hiring a homeless lady, and she productively worked for, and that's the thing, is that I know we made money off of her, which, what does that say about the money they make off of everybody else? If they can take someone that was doing the bare minimum of the job position, and to do anything else, you basically had to hold her hand while she did it.
And she was still profitable.
And she is still profitable at minimum wage. Now, two things, though. On the other hand, she wasn't proportionately profitable. If you want to talk about a shift where you have me and a manager and her, and then she's adding probably about, let's say my general manager, me, and this lady that doesn't work for us anymore. Literally, she would have been 10% of the value creation. And even that, it would actually be a procedural thing where she would basically be dealing with the customer in a way that freed one of us up. So that's actually a great thing that I've talked about with my boss before, is like, the fact of the matter is, if he has a worker that can free him up from a position, he can be more valuable to the company than if he has to work that position. And that's, I know you've commented, I know that recently our friend Joel shared a post that was a list of important principles that are eponymous, that they're named after the people that were involved with them somehow. And one of those, I forget the guy's name, sorry guy, but it was about that basically, that's an L, that's a loss, that is a missed opportunity if, as a manager, you have to assign yourself what should be one of your underlings' responsibilities. Because if you're taking on operations, then that means that you are not managing at the same level. You cannot afford the same level of focus, right? So the point being, though, is that you have this situation where these economists so much, and I know it's about time to wrap it up, but I'll be happy to give you the last word if you want it, but
Sure.
that's where we're at, is that these economists want to essentially take on the view of Wall Street, of the universities, of Congress. The big buzzword is seeing like a state, right?
Mhm.
And well, let me tell you something. I've been playing all sorts of various games. I've been studying history, studying principles, all that. Seeing like a state is something that anyone can learn to do. And I say anyone, obviously. I'm sorry if you're watching this video, you can do it. I understand not literally everyone, but if you've made it to 244 into this video, you too can go pick up the book Seeing Like a State. You can read it and you'll know what else to study to do it better. It's that simple. And the problem is that, so far no one has to my knowledge put out a book popular enough for me to be aware that it exists, of basically like looking over the shoulder of the state, how to make sure that people who are seeing like a state are not abusing the rest of us for fun and profit.
Yep.
Because it's a really, as you said, you get this insider information, and as I said, self-fulfilling prophecies. They will come up with any reason, doesn't matter, why something's going to happen in the future, and it doesn't matter how they make it happen, they'll make it happen.
Right.
Anyways, like I said, I appreciate you taking the time tonight. Had a great time. If you want to do it again sometime, totally down.
Yeah, total pleasure. Fun conversation.
You have any closing words?
No, I think just I don't know. Net profit margin in retail is around 2 to 3% in general.
That's unhealthy, and wow.
That's what it takes to be. That's what it takes to be the alpha in America. If you're going to win at retail, you got to be close to the bottom in prices. And apart from that, self-fulfilling prophecies. Rise of China, probably a perfect example. A bunch of people who thought they were very smart were talking about how they were going to overtake us, and they put a bunch of wind in those sails, even though the ship was in serious trouble with demographics and many other problems. And now China's going to probably deflate the same way Japan did in the 80s.
To be fair, that's a lot on Xi, because if Xi would have had good economists advising him,
yeah,
I'm sorry, but there's absolutely ways to turn those lemons into lemonades, and he didn't.
Yeah,
and instead he put the lemons in a cage, and he put a padlock on the cage, man.
And I can tell you, the moment as an investor, I was putting some of my money into China, like Alibaba, Tencent, and I can tell you the moment when he imprisoned Jack Ma.
Thank you. Like, that's what I was thinking. Yes. Okay, I was just like, Jack Ma. Yes.
There goes that investment. Like it.
Yeah, that's
in good conscience. What kind of investor is going to invest in the economy where you're disappearing your best people? Say what you will about what they're doing to Elon Musk. They haven't disappeared.
No, and that's right. And that's if people get nothing else from this podcast, that's the message that I care about, is that incentives matter. Yeah. Like, we notice we didn't get into hard numbers on just about anything, because that's not where the interesting part was. The interesting part is the system set up to make people do the stuff that we say we want them to do? Yes. Or is it set up to reward different kinds of behavior that out of the other side of our mouth we're saying we don't want?
Yeah, if the direction is right, the numbers don't matter.
Well, and the thing about that is that, how do you get the direction right? You do have to pay attention to which are the biggest forces, under what conditions they're going to reverse direction, etc. But that doesn't detract from the fact that you're never going to get to there if you are not, as you're saying, like, looking at that in the first place and choosing to make a choice. Most people don't think of their decisions to choose to not choose, but that's the most common type of decision that will affect their future wealth to the extent that they're interacting with any market.
Oh yeah, definitely. And sometimes
And
the
if you
best
let the
decision
people that
is
are
to do
profiting
nothing.
off of you make your choices for you, holy crap.
Yeah, definitely. And they will be sucked into whatever weird little hobby thing they're trying to do at that time, and they will fly right off the rails.
And that's the other funny part is, of course, in America we have this mythology of, like, the comeback. Yeah, well, it's hard to come back from zero, and the only people that do it are the people that got to zero by bad luck. That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, unless you go to zero on purpose, and then you take a bunch of the assets of the thing that went to zero and make sure they fall into the pockets of your friends, which is a very good,
oh, yeah.
very lucrative business. Bankruptcy, fucking with bankruptcies, and they're like, Trump went bankrupt so many times. It's like, yeah,
I'm sure he saved a lot of money doing that.
Yeah, I'm sure not all those assets went to waste,
Here's the other thing too, is that the people that he owed it to got to write it off on some level or another, so that they didn't suffer complete loss, right? And and no, the big thing there is that, like, at the end of the day, the amount that any individual in the US, like, institutions punch above their weight, but any individual in the US, you can, what we were talking about, the magnitude affecting the directionality, every freaking, person that actually has assets of 100 million or more, if all of them are pushing in this direction, the rest of society is so big that what happens is they're so used to just being able to push as hard as they want, and society is just going to keep chugging along, and they are collecting that extra effort from society when they would have otherwise had to add that effort themselves. And that's what I think people aren't getting about that dynamic, is that the people who win at the market are the ones going against the rest of us. And the way that they make that happen is that they influence where the rest of us are going. That's the self-fulfilling prophecy. They send clear signals on where the market is going right after they have made their arrangements to be on the opposite side of the general public.
Yeah. And, I guess what I'm really good at is seeing them, they say, do something, and I do the opposite of that.
Right. And not always, but just mostly, because mostly they aren't bothering to say it.
Yeah, this is uninvestable. I'm like, let me research the company's financials. Oh, wow, this is really good value.
Oh my gosh, accredited investors only. Oh, that pisses me off. Like, so many of the things that I would have actually invested in, until I can scrape up $40,000 in a bank account, I don't get to invest in them. So.
For what things?
For instance, there was
like debt offer?
There was one that was basically buying up farmland. Like, it was almost like competing with Bill Gates, you know what I mean? Which, if you haven't kept up on that, he's now providing essentially all of the potatoes that McDonald's needs for their products.
Wow.
They're GMO potatoes, for all I care about. I don't actually, but I'm a lot more concerned about the glyphosate than whether or not the potatoes are GMO. But no. So that's the one that I was most frustrated about not being able to invest in. And I haven't looked to see if it's still around or whether it's actually increased in value or whatever. But it was basically a farm land owning co-op that was then, releasing the lands to whoever was actually farming it.
I'm very sad I
So
can't invest in SpaceX because it's still private.
yeah, yeah,
But they still do debt
and
offerings, but not to little old me. They don't want little old me giving them some debt.
right, exactly. Well, and I get the principle that they don't want to risk the money of people who can't afford to lose it, but that I think that they've used that respectable reason to create a barrier that is not actually focused around doing that.
They
It's
also don't
focused
want the
around
scrutiny.
creating a barrier to entry. So
Public companies have a whole bunch of rules about what the CEO can say and about, yeah, blah,
right,
blah, blah. Whereas a private company, it's like whatever, to a degree, there's still rules, but less.
right.
But
Oh
yeah,
well.
I really got to get my dinner.
Yeah, I
But
was gonna say we're pushing 3 hours here, and thanks again for coming. I'm going to end the recording. I'll see you guys.